It's just a cold. You'll be fine if you sleep it off." I couldn't believe what my husband had just said. Despite my high fever, he was planning to leave me and our young daughter to attend a friend's wedding overseas. Off he went, genuinely excited about his trip, unaware of the surprising twists awaiting him. My name is Allison. I'm a 35-year-old stay-at-home mom, living with my husband David and our 5-year-old daughter Misty. Misty adores picture books and is a sweet, kind-hearted girl who fills our home with laughter. She is my pride and joy. David is a social butterfly, well-versed in various hobbies and always full of entertaining stories. He was the man I was proud to marry, and I believed that our union would bring eternal happiness. In the beginning, our married life was blissful. We enjoyed a sweet newlywed phase and were blessed with a child fairly quickly. At David's request, I quit my job when I got pregnant. The pregnancy was smooth, and I gave birth to Misty without any complications. That's when everything changed. After the birth, David underwent a drastic transformation. He started criticizing me relentlessly, calling me fat because I struggled to shed the baby weight. "You're not attractive anymore," he'd say. "Make an effort to lose some weight." While grappling with the challenges of first-time parenting, I was also chastised for not keeping up with household chores. Despite my pleas for assistance, David's response was harsh. "Don't be lazy. You eat but can't even handle chores or childcare." Unbelievable. It became evident that David resented the time household responsibilities and childcare demanded of him. I was taken aback by this selfish side of him, especially considering how excited he had been about the pregnancy. Whenever I mustered the courage to ask for help, David would complain to neighbors and relatives, portraying me as negligent and incompetent, which left me feeling humiliated and afraid to confront him. However, the most significant problem was money. Before Misty arrived, we both contributed to a joint account and spent the rest as we pleased. Once she was born, David took charge of finances since I no longer had an income. Unfortunately, he provided very little for our living expenses. On one occasion, he insisted I manage with just $300 for all three of us. This caused me immense stress, affecting my ability to produce enough breast milk, forcing us to rely on formula. Between formula and diapers alone, $300 was woefully inadequate. Desperate to save money, I started cooking budget meals, but David's response was anything but supportive. He would angrily criticize the food, saying, "Don't serve me this cheap-smelling food." When I suggested finding a job to contribute financially, he belittled me, claiming, "You can't handle housework, let alone a job and raising a child. You're just planning to slack off and make me do everything. Manage with the money I give you." David vehemently opposed the idea of me working, perhaps fearing it would increase his household responsibilities. Now that Misty is 5 years old, David seems to have lost interest in her. He often ignores her attempts to engage with him, opting instead to immerse himself in his phone. I had believed that marrying David would create a happy family, but I was mistaken. Witnessing Misty's disappointment as David ignores her and refuses to play with her breaks my heart. Then, one day, I discovered that David had used the money we had saved for Misty's education. As I am not working, I worry that we are barely scraping by each month. David is responsible for managing our finances, yet he refuses to disclose our savings or expenditures. I suspect we may not be saving at all and could be running a deficit each month, prompting him to dip into the education fund. When I confronted David about it, he adamantly refused to explain how he had spent the money. Finally, he snapped, "I earned this money. How I spend it is my business. You and Misty eat because of me, so stop complaining." Despite my repeated attempts to discuss the matter, David remained obstinate, and our conversations led nowhere. Then David dropped a bombshell. A friend invited me to their wedding overseas. I was stunned. Even if his friends covered some travel expenses, going abroad would still be a significant financial strain. We were already struggling to afford Misty's education, so how could we possibly afford an overseas trip? I tried to discuss this with David, but he brushed off my concerns and began making arrangements for the trip. Divorce crossed my mind briefly, but the thought of Misty having only one father held me back. I couldn't bear to take that away from her. The day before David was set to leave, I was hit with a high fever. It had been years since I last had a fever, and this was the first time as an adult. I was plagued by headaches, nausea, dizziness, and body aches that clouded my senses. "Could you please consider skipping the wedding? I'm really struggling with this fever," I asked weakly. David chuckled dismissively, saying, "You'll be fine if you sleep it off." His tone carried an edge of impatience as he added, "Stop being so needy. Handle it yourself. You can't even manage yourself, and you're not even working." Desperate, I pleaded, "Could you at least get some food for Misty? She hasn't eaten properly since yesterday." Exhaling heavily, David replied, "I don't have time for that, and I don't want to catch anything. I'm staying in the hotel tonight." With that, he left us behind to attend the overseas wedding. At that moment, suffering from a high fever, I had made a decision. For Misty's sake, I knew I had to let go of someone as selfish as David. 5 days later, David returned home in high spirits. "I'm back. Why are Mom and Dad here?" David's parents were sitting in the living room. They remained silent. "What's going on? Where's Allison?" It was Misty who answered David's question. "Mom is in heaven now." "What? What are you talking about?" David, thinking Misty was joking, burst into laughter. His parents shook their heads in disbelief. "You've made a terrible mistake. It's too late now," his father finally said. David looked bewildered, struggling to understand the weight of their words. Did Allison really die from that high fever? David muttered to himself as he watched his parents leave the house with Misty. She waved at him, but as usual, he ignored her. His parents got into the car and drove away. That was the plan. My parents and I were quietly waiting in the kids' room. I had my phone connected to my in-laws and was monitoring the living room through a hidden camera on my computer. Nearby, my sister stood ready to pick up Misty, shielding her from hearing things she shouldn't. Only my in-laws remained in the car. During David's time overseas, I had informed both sets of parents about his appalling behavior. I had been contemplating divorce, but I knew he would resist paying alimony or child support. Thus, I sought their support in revealing the truth for the divorce proceedings. I had told Misty she might not see David again, and when she expressed a desire to say goodbye, I arranged for my in-laws to be present in the living room. Remarkably, Misty didn't protest the possibility of not seeing her father again. Even at her young age, she seemed to understand that her father wasn't treating her well. From now on, I would have to focus on Misty's well-being above all else. I wondered how David would react to Misty's words, "Mom is in heaven." Would he show remorse for his actions or apologize tearfully? I watched in silence through the hidden camera, hoping for some sign of regret. Instead, David did something unexpected. He made a phone call, his voice filled with elation. "Brianna, I don't have all the details yet, but it looks like my wife is gone. Finally, the obstacle is out of the way. I should get the insurance money soon. Let the old folks take care of Misty. Let's be together. You're the only one I love, Brianna." At that moment, we realized David had been having an affair all along, and he saw me and our child as obstacles to his plans. He intended to use the insurance money to marry this other woman. My parents, who were watching the footage with me, shared my fury. Meanwhile, my in-laws, who were on the phone with us, had also heard David's call and were equally incensed. I signaled to both sets of parents, and together we stormed into the living room where David stood, shocked to see us. "Wait, Allison, but I thought you were in heaven," he stammered, trying to explain himself. I couldn't hold back my laughter at David's ignorance. Heaven is what Misty calls her room. It's filled with sky blue sheets and white pillows. You wouldn't know because you never bother talking to her. "Wait, really?" I thought. "Well, never mind." David stumbled, unaware that we had overheard his phone call and trying to backtrack, but it was futile. "Enough with the excuses. We've been watching you on a hidden camera. You abandoned your sick family to attend a wedding, and you've been having an affair." I confronted him firmly. "No, it's not like that. I haven't." David attempted to defend himself, but I cut him off. "No more lies. The decision is made. We're getting a divorce, and I'll be pursuing alimony and child support, so get ready," I declared. My father-in-law erupted in anger, his face flushed. "If you go through with this, don't ever show your face here again. You're no longer our son," he shouted vehemently. Immediately following that, David's cell phone rang, filling the room with his distinctive ringtone. David made no move to answer, so I picked up his phone to see who it was. The caller was Brianna, David's mistress. Without hesitation, I answered the call and put it on speaker so everyone present could hear. "Hello? What was that about earlier? Living together was just a joke, right? I have a fiancé, so stop deluding yourself. I can't be with someone so clueless. Don't contact me again. Brianna's voice rang through the room before she hung up abruptly. David, now rejected by his mistress as well, went pale and fell to his knees, pleading for forgiveness. "I'm sorry. Please forgive me. If my family disowns me, you're the only one I have left. And I can't afford to pay alimony or anything like that. I've already spent so much on Brianna during this trip." David started rambling unprompted, as if attempting to explain himself. I gave him a stern glare. "So you didn't attend a wedding? You left your family behind for a romantic getaway?" Well," David faltered, unable to find words to justify his actions. I couldn't believe he would abandon us and incriminate himself by admitting to an affair. I questioned why I had ever married such a fool. I should have divorced him much earlier. Watching David stumble over his words, I resolved to focus on moving forward with my life, just Misty and me. Later, I checked David's phone and discovered numerous photos and videos from his trip with his mistress. It was evident that his story about attending a friend's wedding was a complete fabrication. Armed with this evidence, I consulted a lawyer and initiated divorce proceedings, seeking rightful compensation and child support. The lawyer conducted an investigation, including a visit to Brianna, who supposedly worked at a nightclub. During the inquiry, Brianna claimed she was merely entertaining an older man as part of her job, but David stubbornly insisted they were in love, causing a significant uproar. It became undeniable that David had been financially supporting Brianna, which explained why he had been stingy with her living expenses and even dipped into Misty's college fund. David's life spiraled into misery, burdened by debts from his extravagant spending and the financial fallout of our divorce. His troubles compounded when news of his affair and lavish trips surfaced at his workplace, leading to a loss of respect and standing among his colleagues. Ironically, the nightclub where Brianna worked turned out to be a popular haunt for David's coworkers, leading to a dramatic confrontation between them. Some of David's colleagues witnessed the scene, spreading gossip throughout the company about his indiscretions. It seemed David confronted Brianna unaware that she was engaged, adding to the spectacle. It was pathetic how easily he let himself be manipulated by a young woman. This incident isolated David at work, further cementing his downward spiral. I later heard he was demoted and faced a significant salary reduction. My lawyer, who kept me informed throughout, also updated me on Brianna's unfortunate turn of events. Her fiancé, a regular patron at the club, discovered her affair with David and promptly called off their engagement. He even demanded compensation for the wedding expenses they had already incurred. Struggling to meet this hefty demand, Brianna resorted to deceitful tactics with other club patrons, which inevitably came to light. Consequently, she was fired from her job. Now, Brianna juggles multiple part-time jobs to repay her debts, living alone in a modest apartment. As for me, I've moved back home and am now living with my parents and Misty. It's a relief to be away from the neighbors who believe David's rumors and lies about me. Life is much calmer now. My parents adore Misty, and she seems happier than she was when she lived with David. David has come to my parents' house a few times, pleading for another chance, but my dad has firmly turned him away. Neither Misty nor I have any desire to see him. If Misty expresses a wish to see her father in the future, I'll consider it, but for now, she has no interest in meeting him. I have no intention of reconciling with David, so I see no reason to engage with him. If his persistence becomes too much, I'm prepared to involve the police. Reflecting on where David and his mistress Brianna are now, I see how destructive affairs can be. They've lost everything and are now living a much more difficult life. It's entirely their own doing. From now on, my focus is on cherishing the happiness I have with my parents and Misty, and leaving David in the past.
Hey there, I'm Zoe. I've always been good at reading people. It's probably why I became a psychologist. I had my own private practice and spent most of my waking hours helping others sort out their problems. Ironic, right? Considering what happened later. Anyway, there I was, approaching my late 30s, when it hit me like a ton of bricks. I wanted a family. Crazy how that sneaks up on you. My best friend, Sarah, must have sensed my sudden desperation because she offered to set me up with her second cousin. "Come on, Zoe," she said over coffee one day. "He's a great guy. Smart, funny, and he's got a good job. What be you got to lose?" I sighed, stirring my latte absently. "I don't know, Sarah. Blind dates aren't really my thing. She rolled her eyes. It's not a blind date if I show you his picture first. Besides, you two can chat online before meeting. It's perfect. That's how I found myself friend requesting Mark on social media later that evening. To my surprise, we hit it off right away. Mark was 38, just a year older than me, and he seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. Our chats were easy, flowing from one topic to the next without any awkward pauses. We chatted for weeks before finally agreeing to meet in person. I was nervous as hell, palms sweating as I waited for him at the coffee shop we'd chosen for our first date. When Mark walked in, I felt my breath catch. He was tall, with kind eyes and a warm smile. He spotted me and waved, making his way over to my table. "Zoe?" he asked, extending his hand. I nodded, returning his smile. "That's me. It's nice to finally meet you in person, Mark." He sat down across from me, and just like that, the nerves melted away. We talked for hours, losing track of time until the barista politely informed us they were closing. As we walked out into the cool evening air, Mark turned to me. "I had a great time, Zoe. Would you like to do this again sometime?" I didn't hesitate. "I'd love to." And just like that, I found myself falling headfirst into a relationship with Mark. We started seeing each other regularly, going on dinner dates, walks in the park, and even a few weekend getaways. As our relationship progressed, I noticed something peculiar about Mark. His phone was constantly buzzing with messages. At first, I didn't think much of it. We all have busy lives, right? But the frequency was unusual, even for a popular guy. One night, as we lay in bed after a nice dinner, his phone lit up for what felt like the 100th time. I couldn't help myself. "Busy night, huh?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Mark glanced at his phone and smiled sheepishly. "Oh, it's just my mom. She likes to check in." I raised an eyebrow. "Your mom? At this hour?" He shrugged, looking a bit uncomfortable. "Yeah, we're pretty close. She raised me alone after my dad died when I was 5. I had pretty bad bronchial asthma as a kid. There were times she literally saved my life." I listened as Mark opened up about his childhood. The more he talked, the clearer the picture became. His mother wasn't just devoted, she was his entire world. "Sounds like you two have a special bond," I said, choosing my words carefully. Mark nodded enthusiastically. "We do. I owe her everything." As a psychologist, alarm bells were ringing in my head. The relationship Mark described sounded codependent, but I pushed those thoughts aside. I wasn't his therapist, I was his girlfriend. It wasn't my place to analyze their relationship. Weeks turned into months, and soon we'd been dating for nearly a year. Mark was sweet, attentive, and our relationship felt solid. But there was always this nagging feeling in the back of my mind about his relationship with his mother. One day, as we were having lunch at my place, Mark suddenly looked nervous. "Zoe," he began, fidgeting with his napkin. "I'd like you to meet my mom. I think you'll really like her. She's excited to meet you too." The next weekend, I found myself standing outside a modest 2-story house, my palms sweating. Mark squeezed my hand reassuringly as he rang the doorbell. The door swung open, revealing a petite woman with graying hair and Mark's kind eyes. She smiled warmly at us. "You must be Zoe," she said, pulling me into an unexpected hug. "I'm Helen. Come in, come in." As we settled in the living room, I couldn't help but notice how Helen's eyes never left Mark. She fussed over him, asking if he wanted a drink or a snack, completely ignoring my presence. I watched their interaction, feeling more like an observer than a participant. Helen dominated the conversation, constantly bringing up stories from Mark's childhood or fretting over his health. As we left a few hours later, I felt drained. Mark, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to the awkwardness. "So, what did you think?" he asked eagerly as we drove away. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Your mom clearly loves you very much." Mark beamed. "She's great, isn't she? I knew you'd like her." I forced a smile, not having the heart to burst his bubble. But as we drove back to my place, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just witnessed something far more complex than a mother's love. 6 months flew by, and before I knew it, Mark was down on one knee, a sparkling ring in his hand. Despite my lingering concerns about his relationship with Helen, I said yes. I was in love, and I truly believed we could work through any issues together. We decided to move in together, into my apartment, of course. As we dove into wedding preparations, I quickly realized this wasn't going to be the fun, exciting experience I'd always imagined. Helen inserted herself into every decision, every detail. It wasn't just the wedding, either. Helen called constantly, always with some crisis that required Mark's immediate attention. One evening, as we were discussing flower arrangements, Mark's phone rang. He answered immediately, his face creasing with concern. "What's wrong, Mom? The sink's leaking? I'll be right there." He hung up and turned to me apologetically. "I've got to go help Mom. Her sink is leaking, and you know how she is with plumbers." This scene repeated itself almost daily. If it wasn't a leaky sink, it was a stubbed toe or a sad mood that only Mark could lift. And if he ever hesitated. "After all I've done for you," Helen's voice would crack over the speakerphone. "I just need a little help. Is that too much to ask?" I couldn't take it anymore. One night, after Mark returned from yet another Helen emergency, I decided to broach the subject. "Mark," I said gently, "I think it might be helpful if we saw a couples therapist. Someone who could help us navigate this situation with your mom. I think her demands are a bit excessive." "Excessive?" Mark's voice rose. "She raised me alone, Zoe. She saved my life multiple times. How can you call that excessive?" I backpedaled, realizing I'd hit a nerve. "I'm not saying she doesn't love you. I'm just worried about the impact on our relationship." Mark softened slightly. "Okay, maybe you're right, but can we do it after the wedding? We're so busy right now, and I don't want to add more stress." I knew I should push harder, insist on addressing this before we tied the knot. But I was exhausted from fighting this invisible battle with Helen. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. The weeks flew by in a whirlwind of cake tastings, dress fittings, and endless phone calls with Helen. Before I knew it, we were just days away from the wedding. Despite the stress, I was excited. My friends had planned a bachelorette party, and I was looking forward to a night of fun without wedding talk or Helen drama. We hit our favorite bar, laughing and dancing. For the first time in months, I felt light, free from the constant tension of planning a wedding under Helen's watchful eye. Then my phone rang. Mark's name flashed on the screen. "Zoe," his voice was tight with panic. "Mom's in the hospital. Her blood pressure spiked. I'm heading there now." I quickly explained the situation to my friends and called a taxi. The ride to the hospital felt endless, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. The moment Helen saw me, her face crumpled. "Oh," she moaned, dramatically covering her face with her hands. "It's you. My blood pressure, it's your fault. All this wedding stress." I froze, shocked by the accusation. "Helen, Helen peeked through her fingers, her eyes narrowing at me. "I can't handle this right now, my poor heart." Mark turned to me, his expression apologetic but firm. "Zoe, could you wait outside? Just for a bit?" Stunned, I nodded and walked out, collapsing into a chair in the hallway. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, nurses and doctors bustling past me. Finally, I stood up, determined to understand what was happening. I approached the nurse's station, using every ounce of my professional demeanor. "Excuse me," I said to the doctor charting nearby. "I'm Zoe, Helen Johnson's future daughter-in-law. Could you tell me about her condition?" The doctor looked up, his expression neutral. "Mrs. Johnson's blood pressure is elevated, but not dangerously so. We're monitoring her, but there's no immediate cause for concern." I took a deep breath, weighing my next words carefully. "Doctor, I'm a psychologist. And I'm concerned that Mrs. Johnson might be dealing with some psychological issues. Has anyone evaluated her mental health? The doctor's eyebrows rose slightly. That's an interesting observation. We haven't done a psychological evaluation, but given what you're saying, it might be worth looking into. I'll make a note to refer her for an assessment. I nodded, grateful for his understanding. Thank you, doctor. I appreciate your help. Returning to my seat in the hallway, I waited a bit longer, hoping Mark would emerge. But as the minutes ticked by, I realized he wasn't coming out anytime soon. Defeated, I sent him a text, heading home. Call me when you can. I called another taxi and went back to our apartment. My phone buzzed with messages from my friends, asking where I'd disappeared to. I sent a quick apology, telling them to enjoy the rest of the night without me. It was past midnight when I heard the key in the lock. Mark shuffled in, looking exhausted. "Hey," he said softly. "You're still up." I sat up, trying to keep the hurt and anger out of my voice. "How's your mom?" He sighed, sinking into the armchair across from me. "She's okay. They're keeping her overnight for observation." I stayed until she fell asleep. She was so upset, Zoe. She kept asking me not to leave her alone. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Mark, do you really think that's all it is? Don't you see what's happening here?" He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Zoe, please, not tonight. Can we just go to bed? I'm exhausted." I wanted to argue, to make him see reason. But looking at his tired face, I knew it was pointless. So I nodded, swallowing my frustration. The big day finally arrived. Mark pulled me aside just before the ceremony and took a deep breath. "Look, I know things have been tense with Mom lately. But I've made some arrangements to keep her happy today. I just need you to go along with it, please?" My heart sank. "What kind of arrangements?" Mark explained quickly. Helen had a special menu prepared for her, citing non-existent allergies. She'd be seated next to Mark at the head table, not with the other parents. The DJ had a list of her favorite songs to play. And, Mark added hesitantly, she wants to make a speech. I closed my eyes, counting to 10 in my head. "Okay," I said finally. "For you, for us." He kissed me gratefully, and I returned to my bridesmaids, plastering on a smile. The ceremony itself was beautiful. As I walked down the aisle, seeing Mark's face light up, I felt a surge of love that pushed all my doubts aside. For a moment, it was just us. The reception was an experience. True to Mark's word, Helen held court at our table, regaling everyone with stories of Mark's childhood. She barely acknowledged my presence, except to occasionally pat my hand condescendingly. When it came time for speeches, I watched in horror as Helen tottered up to the microphone, wine glass in hand. "My dear friends and family," she began, her voice wavering. "We're here to celebrate my only son's wedding day." She went on for what felt like hours, talking about Mark's childhood, his accomplishments, and how she'd sacrificed everything for him. I was mentioned exactly once, as an afterthought. As she finally wrapped up, Helen raised her glass. "To my son, and his wife. May they be as happy as Mark and I have always been." I downed my champagne in one gulp. The rest of the night passed in a blur. We danced, we laughed, we cut the cake. And through it all, Helen hovered, always ready to interject herself into every moment. The wedding is over, but as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, nothing changed. Helen called every day, sometimes multiple times a day. There was always some crisis, some reason she needed Mark's immediate attention. One day, as he grabbed his keys, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Mark, we need to talk about this. It's not healthy, for any of us." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, you're right. We should see someone. A therapist, like you suggested. Let's look into it this weekend." But when the weekend came, there was always some reason to postpone. Helen needed help with her grocery shopping. The lawn needed mowing. the cat needed to go to the vet. And so it went, week after week. Empty promises and endless excuses. 3 months into our marriage, I was at my wit's end. The constant intrusions from Helen, Mark's unwillingness to set boundaries, and the strain on our relationship were taking their toll. When my vacation time came around, I saw it as a golden opportunity. "Mark," I said one evening, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice, "let's go on a honeymoon. Just the two of us, away from everything. What do you say?" To my surprise and relief, Mark's face lit up. "That sounds amazing, Zoe. Where do you want to go?" We spent the next hour excitedly planning a tropical getaway. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful. This was our chance to reconnect, to remember why we fell in love in the first place. "I'll take care of everything," Mark promised. "The flights, the hotel, all of it. And when we get back, I promise we'll deal with the situation with Mom. Maybe look into that therapy we talked about." The day of our departure arrived, and I was practically bouncing with excitement as we drove to the airport. Mark seemed a bit distracted, but I chalked it up to pre-flight jitters. As we approached the check-in counter, Mark handed me my boarding pass. I glanced at it, then did a double take. "Economy?" I asked, confused. "I thought we were flying together." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah, about that. I had some credit card bonuses I could use, but there was only enough for one first-class ticket. I figured since I'm taller, it made sense for me to take it. It'll save us money overall." I stared at him, hurt and bewildered. "But, it's our honeymoon. Couldn't we have both flown economy and sat together?" "Come on, Zoe," he said, a hint of irritation in his voice. "Don't make a big deal out of this. It's just a few hours." Swallowing my disappointment, I tried one last time. "Okay, well, can I at least come to the first-class lounge with you before the flight? We could pay extra." "No," Mark cut me off quickly. "The ticket's in my name. They won't let you in." "Look, I've got to go check in. I'll see you on the other side, okay?" Before I could respond, he was gone, wheeling his suitcase towards the first-class check-in. Feeling deflated, I made my way through security and to the regular boarding lounge. As I sat there, trying to salvage my excitement for the trip, a familiar figure caught my eye. There, just outside the first-class lounge, I saw a flash of graying hair and a floral dress that looked suspiciously like something Helen would wear. My heart started racing. Was I imagining things? Had the stress of the past few months finally made me paranoid? But Mark's strange behavior, his insistence on flying first class alone, his refusal to let me into the lounge, it all suddenly made a horrible kind of sense. Before I could talk myself out of it, I marched up to the first-class lounge desk. "Excuse me," I said, pulling out my credit card. "I'd like to purchase access to the lounge, please." The attendant looked skeptical, but processed my payment. As she handed me the access card, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I might find. I pushed open the door to the lounge, my eyes scanning the plush seats and buffet tables. And there, in a quiet corner by the window, sat Mark and Helen, heads close together over cups of coffee. They looked comfortable, like they were embarking on their own little adventure. I took a deep breath and strode towards Mark and Helen, my heels clicking loudly on the polished floor. They both looked up as I approached, and I saw the color drain from Mark's face. "Zoe," he exclaimed, jumping to his feet. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, my voice ice cold. "Care to explain why you're here with your mother instead of your wife?" Mark glanced nervously around the lounge. "Zoe, please," he said in a low voice. "Let's not do this here. I can explain everything after we land, I promise." Before I could respond, Helen chimed in, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Oh, Zoe dear, what a surprise. Mark and I are just about to take off for a lovely first-class trip together. Isn't that nice? But what are you doing in this lounge?" Mark stepped between us, his face a mask of guilt and fear. "Zoe, I'm sorry. The truth is, there were enough bonus points for 2 first-class tickets. I thought Mom deserved a nice trip, and what about me, Mark? I practically shouted, no longer caring about the scene we were causing. I'm your wife. We're supposed to be starting our life together, but instead, you're jetting off with Mommy Dearest while I'm shoved in economy like an afterthought. The lounge had gone completely silent. Every eye was on us, but I was beyond caring. Do you have any idea what it's been like these past few months? I continued, years of frustration pouring out. The constant calls, the emergencies, the way you always put her first. And now this? How could you do this to me? Mark reached out to touch my arm, but I jerked away. Zoe, please, he pleaded. You need to calm down. We can work this out. Once we're on vacation, we'll have time to talk, to get closer. We can fix this, I promise. I stared at him, suddenly feeling very calm and very, very tired. Fix this? I repeated quietly. Mark, there's nothing left to fix. I'm going home and I'm filing for divorce. Mark's jaw dropped. Divorce? Zoe, you can't be serious. But Helen cut him off, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. She stood up and linked her arm through Mark's. Well, if that's how you feel, dear, I think it's for the best. Come along, Mark. We don't want to miss our flight. I watched in stunned silence as Helen led Mark away. He looked back at me once, his expression a mix of regret and relief, before they disappeared through the boarding gate. For a moment, I just stood there, feeling the weight of dozens of curious stares. Then, without a word, I turned on my heel and walked out of the lounge. As I made my way through the airport, my mind was oddly blank. I should have been crying, screaming, feeling something. But all I felt was a strange sense of liberation. I spent the next few hours gathering Mark's belongings. Clothes, books, the silly knickknacks his mother always bought him, I packed it all up methodically, my mind oddly calm. When I was done, I called a courier service and had everything sent to a nearby storage facility. The next day, I contacted a divorce lawyer. As I signed the preliminary paperwork, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. This was the right decision, I knew it in my bones. Instead of wallowing, I decided to use my vacation time for myself. I redecorated the apartment, erasing all traces of Mark. I reconnected with old friends, started yoga classes, and spent long hours reading books I'd been meaning to get to for years. A month passed, and my phone buzzed with a message from Mark. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Zoe, please, can we talk? I typed out a brief response. Storage facility number 247. Access code 8891. Your things are there. Divorce papers have been sent to your mother's address. Please sign and return them. Then I blocked his number. Returning to work was like a breath of fresh air. I threw myself into my practice with renewed energy. My experiences, painful as they were, had given me new insights into codependent relationships. I channeled this knowledge into a series of research papers, carefully anonymizing the details. To my surprise and delight, these papers caught the attention of the psychology department at the local college. They invited me to give a guest lecture, which turned into an offer for a part-time teaching position. It was at the college that I met James. He was a fellow professor in the psychology department, tall, with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. We bonded over shared research interests and a mutual love of terrible puns. As the weeks passed, James and I grew closer. He was everything Mark wasn't: independent, respectful of boundaries, and wonderfully self-assured. He had a teenage daughter from a previous marriage, and watching him balance his role as a father with his career and our budding relationship was a revelation. One evening, as we were grading papers together, my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, my old friend who had originally set me up with Mark. Hey Zoe, it read. Thought you should know, Mark's still living with Helen. If anything, they seem even closer now. I'm so sorry for my part in all this. Hope you're doing okay. I stared at the message for a moment, then set my phone aside. James looked up, concern in his eyes. "Everything all right?" he asked. I smiled, realizing that for the first time in a long time, I truly was all right. "Yeah," I said. "Everything's fine." And it was. Mark and Helen's relationship was no longer my problem. I had my own life to live, my own path to follow. I'm Catherine, and I grew up in what you might call a big family. Dad was hell-bent on having a son. So, they kept trying, over and over. Mom got pregnant again and again until the doctors finally put their foot down. "No more," they said. "It's too risky." That's when Mom and Dad finally threw in the towel on their dream of a boy. Being the oldest, I got stuck with a lot of the grunt work. Don't get me wrong, I loved my sisters, but sometimes it felt like I was more of a parent than a sibling. I had to grow up fast, you know? While other kids were out playing, I was changing diapers, doing laundry, and helping Mom with everything around the house. Things really changed when my youngest sister was born. It was like Mom and Dad suddenly remembered they were parents. They showered her with attention, bought her the best toys, signed her up for every club and activity under the sun. Whatever she wanted, she got. One day, when I was about 14, I overheard Mom talking on the phone. "I just don't have time for the older girls anymore," she said. "Catherine's handling it, though. She's such a good helper." Helper, that's what I was reduced to. Not a daughter, not even a sister, just a helper. But I had a secret that kept me going. My grandmother, Mom's mother. They'd had some big falling out years ago and hadn't spoken since. But I'd managed to find her number, and we'd been talking in secret. As I got older, I started to dream about college. I wanted more for myself than just being the family babysitter. But when I graduated high school, Mom and Dad dropped a bombshell on me. "There's no money for your education, Catherine," Dad said, not even looking me in the eye. "You need to get a job and help out financially. We need to save for your sister's education." That night, I cried myself to sleep, feeling trapped and hopeless. But then I remembered my secret weapon, Grandma. The next day, I called her, spilling out everything between sobs. "Don't you worry, sweetheart," she said, her voice firm and determined. "I'll pay for your college. You deserve a chance at a better life." And just like that, a whole new world opened up for me. I applied to colleges in other cities, dreaming of a fresh start. When I got accepted to study economics, I was over the moon. But my parents, they didn't see it that way. "You're abandoning your family," Mom accused, her eyes cold. "After everything we've done for you." Done for me? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I've been raising your kids since I was a kid myself." "Get out," Dad said, his voice low and angry. "If you're going, then go. But don't expect any support from us." I packed my bags that night, my sisters watching with tear-filled eyes. "Don't go, Kathy," they pleaded. "I have to," I told them, hugging each one tight. "But I'll always be here for you. Always." As I walked out the door, I heard Dad's voice behind me. "Girls, you are not to have any contact with Catherine. Do you understand?" As I settled into college life, I felt like I could finally breathe. The campus was bustling with energy, and for once, I didn't have to worry about anyone but myself. But even as I embraced this new chapter, I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. I missed my sisters fiercely. Despite my parents' ban, I couldn't bear the thought of completely cutting ties with them. One night, I got a call from an unknown number. My heart raced as I answered. "Kathy?" It was my second youngest sister's voice, barely above a whisper. "Emily? Is that you?" I could hardly contain my excitement. "Yeah, it's me. I'm using my friend's phone. Mom and Dad can't know." We talked for hours that night, catching up on everything. Emily told me how things had changed at home, how our parents were even stricter now, and how much they all missed me. "Even Sarah?" I asked, referring to our youngest sister. There was a pause on the other end. "Sarah, she's different, Kathy. She told Mom and Dad about us calling you. They took our phones away, but don't worry, we'll find ways to keep in touch. We love you, Kathy. Those secret calls became my lifeline. My sisters, except for Sarah, would use their friends' phones to reach out to me. We'd talk about their lives, their dreams, and I'd share stories about college. It wasn't the same as being there, but it was something. Meanwhile, I threw myself into my studies. Economics fascinated me, and I found myself excelling in my classes. My professors took notice, and soon I was being recommended for internships and special projects. As my college years flew by, I couldn't help but think about my family back home. I'd hear snippets from my sisters about how Sarah was still the golden child, how she was in all these clubs and always the center of attention. Mom and Dad are talking about sending her to some fancy private school, my sister Jessica told me during one of our secret calls. What about you and Emily? I asked, already knowing the answer. Oh, you know, Jessica said, trying to sound nonchalant. We'll probably just go to the local high school. It's fine, really. But I knew it wasn't fine. I knew how it felt to be overlooked, to be treated like you didn't matter as much. It broke my heart that my sisters were going through the same thing. As graduation approached, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. I'd done well in college, thanks in no small part to my grandmother's support. She'd been my rock through it all, always there with a kind word or a bit of advice when I needed it. I'm so proud of you, Catherine, she told me over the phone one night. You've overcome so much. Your grandfather would have been proud too. The day of my graduation, I scanned the crowd, hoping against hope that maybe, just maybe, my parents and sisters would be there. But they weren't. The only familiar face in the sea of people was my grandmother's, beaming with pride. Fresh out of college, I hit the ground running. The job was challenging, but I thrived on it. Months flew by, and I settled into a routine. Work, gym, home, repeat. It wasn't exciting, but it was mine. I was building my own life, on my own terms. Then came the company's annual corporate party. I almost didn't go, large gatherings still made me a bit uncomfortable. But my colleague, Jen, insisted. Come on, Catherine, she pleaded. It'll be fun. Plus, I heard some bigwigs from our partner companies will be there. Great networking opportunity. The party was in full swing when I arrived. Soft jazz played in the background as people mingled, drinks in hand. I was about to make a beeline for the punch bowl when I quite literally bumped into someone. Oh, I'm so sorry, I stammered, looking up to see a pair of kind brown eyes. No harm done, the man said with a warm smile. I'm Michael, by the way. I don't think we've met. Catherine, I replied, shaking his hand. I'm from the economics department. We got to talking, and I learned that Michael was an executive from one of our partner companies. He was smart, funny, and easy to talk to. Before I knew it, hours had passed. As the party wound down, Michael asked for my number. I'd love to continue this conversation over coffee sometime, he said. I hesitated for a moment, then thought, why not? I'd spent so much of my life taking care of others. Maybe it was time to let someone take care of me for a change. Our first date turned into a second, then a third. Before I knew it, we were officially a couple. Michael was everything I'd never known I wanted, kind, supportive, and he actually listened when I talked. A year later, he proposed to me. As we started planning the wedding, I faced a dilemma. Should I invite my family? Despite everything, they were still my parents, my sisters. After much thought, I sent the invitations. To my parents, to all my sisters, even Sarah. I also sent one to my grandmother, the one person who had always been there for me. Weeks passed, and I heard nothing from my parents or sisters. Then, one day, I got a call from Emily. Kathy, she said, her voice trembling. We got your invitation. Mom and Dad, they won't let us come. They won't even let us send you a card. I'm so sorry. The day of the wedding arrived. As I stood in front of the mirror in my white dress, I felt a mix of joy and sadness. My grandmother walked in, her eyes shining with tears. "Oh, Catherine," she said, hugging me tight. "You look beautiful. I'm so proud of you." As I walked down the aisle towards Michael, I saw the faces of our friends, his family, and my grandmother. My family wasn't there, but I realized something important: family isn't always about blood. It's about love, support, and acceptance. The years after our wedding flew by in a whirlwind of love, laughter, and shared dreams. Michael and I settled into our life together, both of us continuing to work and build our careers. We traveled, we explored new hobbies together, and we talked endlessly about our future. And then we decided to start trying for a baby. Months passed, then a year, then 2. Nothing happened. We went through all the tests, tried every recommendation, but still, no baby. It was heartbreaking. The next few years were a roller coaster of hope and disappointment. We went through treatment after treatment, each failure hitting us harder than the last. One day, after another failed round of IVF, I broke down. "Maybe we're not meant to be parents," I sobbed into Michael's chest. He held me tight, stroking my hair. "Hey, look at me," he said gently. "We're going to be parents. Maybe not in the way we originally thought, but we will be. What do you think about adoption? A child is a child, Catherine. All they need is love, and we've got plenty of that." His words warmed my heart, and I felt a glimmer of hope. "Okay," I said, wiping my tears. "Let's do it. Let's adopt." The adoption process was long and often frustrating. There were so many forms to fill out, interviews to go through, home studies to pass. But we persevered, driven by our desire to give a child a loving home. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we got the call. The day we met Lily was one I'll never forget. She was tiny, with big brown eyes and skin darker than ours. She looked scared and confused, clinging to her social worker's hand. I knelt down to her level. "Hi, Lily," I said softly. "I'm Catherine, and this is Michael. We've been waiting a long time to meet you." She looked at us warily, then back at her social worker, who nodded encouragingly. Slowly, Lily reached out and took my hand. In that moment, I fell in love. This was our daughter. I didn't care that she didn't look like us or share our DNA. She was ours, and we were hers. When Lily was about 5, we sat her down and explained, in simple terms, how she came to be our daughter. We showed her pictures from the day we met her, told her how much we'd wanted her, how we'd fallen in love with her the moment we saw her. Lily listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. When we finished, she was quiet for a moment. "So, you picked me?" she asked finally. I smiled, tears in my eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. Out of all the children in the world, we picked you. And we'd pick you again every single time." She beamed at us, then threw her arms around us both. "I love you, Mommy and Daddy," she said. As I held my daughter close, I thought about my own childhood. The pain, the neglect, the feeling of never being good enough. I vowed then and there that Lily would never feel that way. She would always know how loved and wanted she was. Life has a funny way of bringing you full circle. One day, Michael said his company had opened a branch in my hometown. And he will become the head of this branch. The move was chaotic, as moves tend to be. But as we settled into our new home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to reach out to my sisters. My parents had passed away a few years back. I hadn't gone to the funeral. But my sisters, maybe it was time to mend those fences. I reached out to Jessica and Emily first. They were cautious at first, but eager to reconnect. We met for coffee, and it was like no time had passed at all. They cooed over pictures of Lily, told me about their own families, their kids. "We've missed you so much, Kathy," Emily said, squeezing my hand. "We're so glad you're back." For a while, everything was perfect. We started having family gatherings, holiday celebrations. Lily was thrilled to have cousins to play with, and I loved seeing her surrounded by family. But then there was Sarah, our youngest sister. From the moment we reconnected, I could tell she hadn't changed much. She was still the spoiled, entitled girl she'd always been, now grown into a woman who thought the world revolved around her and her family. At our first big family gathering, Sarah showed up with her husband and their son, Tommy. From the moment they arrived, it was clear that Sarah saw this as a competition rather than a reunion. "Tommy, show your aunties how well you can sing," she'd say, pushing her son forward. "He's taking lessons, you know. The teacher says he's a prodigy." As the party went on, I noticed Lily hanging back, looking uncomfortable. She approached Tommy, holding out a piece of candy. "Want to share?" she asked shyly. Before Tommy could respond, Sarah swooped in. "Tommy, don't take that," she screeched. "Throw it away. Her hands are dirty." I was across the room in an instant. "Sarah, what are you talking about? Lily's hands are clean." But Sarah just glared at me, then at Lily. "Well, you never know with her kind," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Come on, Tommy. Let's go play with your real cousins." I stood there, shocked and hurt. Did she really just say that? About my daughter? From that moment on, things were tense. Sarah made it clear at every gathering that she didn't consider Lily part of the family. She'd loudly proclaimed that Tommy couldn't play with Lily because who knows what diseases she might have, or we don't know her genetic background. Each time, I'd confront her, defend my daughter. But the damage was being done. I could see Lily withdrawing, becoming quieter at these family events. One day, I made a decision. I wouldn't force Lily to attend these gatherings anymore. I started declining invitations, making excuses. Jessica and Emily understood, even though they were disappointed. As the dust settled from our move and the family drama that ensued, I found solace in my visits to Grandma. She had been my rock through everything, and now, in her twilight years, I wanted to be there for her as much as she had been for me. Every weekend, Lily and I would make the short drive to Grandma's house. She would be waiting on the porch, her face lighting up as soon as she saw us. "There's my girls," she'd call out, arms outstretched. Lily would race up the steps, throwing herself into Grandma's embrace. "Grandma, I missed you." Watching them together always warmed my heart. Grandma doted on Lily, showering her with love and attention. She never once treated Lily differently because she was adopted. To Grandma, Lily was family, plain and simple. As the months passed, Grandma's health began to decline. Our visits became less about long talks and more about quiet companionship. Lily would read to her, or show her drawings she'd made. Even in her weakened state, Grandma's love for us shone through. The day Grandma passed was one of the hardest of my life. We'd been there with her at the end, holding her hand as she slipped away peacefully. Lily, wise beyond her years, had climbed onto the bed and curled up next to her great-grandmother. "It's okay, Grandma," she'd whispered. "You can rest now. We love you." In the days that followed, as we dealt with our grief and the logistics that come with losing a loved one, we received some unexpected news. Grandma's lawyer called, asking us to come to his office. "Your grandmother left a will," he explained when we arrived. "And, well, you might want to sit down for this." What he told us next left me speechless. Grandma had left everything to me and Lily. The house, several cars, and over $1 million. "Your grandfather was quite successful," the lawyer explained. "And your grandmother was an astute investor. She had intended to leave it all to your mother, despite their estrangement. But when your mother passed..." I nodded, understanding. Grandma had changed her will, leaving everything to us. When word got out about the inheritance, my phone started ringing off the hook. Jessica and Emily called to congratulate me, saying I deserved it. But then came the call I'd been dreading. "Sarah." "Catherine," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "I heard about Grandma's will. So, when are you sharing the inheritance with the rest of us?" I felt a flash of anger. After everything she'd said and done, how dare she? "I'm not," I said firmly. The inheritance is for me and Lily. That's what Grandma wanted. But that's not fair, Sarah screeched. I'm family too. I deserve. I cut her off. No, Sarah, you don't. Goodbye. And I hung up. As I put down the phone, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For so long, I'd tried to please everyone, to be the perfect daughter and sister. But now, I realized it was time to put my own family first. It was Jessica's birthday, and despite my reservations, I decided it was time to make an appearance at a family gathering. When we arrived, the party was in full swing. Jessica's backyard was filled with laughter and chatter. Kids ran around playing tag while adults mingled, drinks in hand. For a moment, it felt like old times. Jessica embraced me warmly. I'm so glad you came, Kathy, she whispered. I could see the genuine happiness in her eyes. For the first hour or so, everything was fine. Lily joined her cousins on the lawn, their laughter floating across the yard. I relaxed a bit, thinking maybe this wasn't such a bad idea after all. But then I saw Sarah. She was moving from child to child, whispering in their ears. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I saw the way the kids' eyes widened, the way they glanced at Lily. Suddenly, Lily was standing alone. The other children had moved away, forming their own group, pointedly excluding her. I watched as my daughter's face crumpled in confusion and hurt. Before I could react, Lily ran to me, tears streaming down her face. Mommy, she sobbed, they don't want to play with me anymore. They said I'm sick and not really family. Rage boiled up inside me. I hugged Lily close, then marched over to Sarah, who was watching the scene with a smug smile. What the hell do you think you're doing? I demanded, my voice low and dangerous. Sarah's smile didn't falter. Oh, calm down, Catherine. I'm just telling the children the truth. They deserve to know about her condition. Condition? I spat. The only person with a condition here is you, Sarah. Your behavior is disgusting. By now, we'd drawn a crowd. The other adults were watching, wide-eyed, as the confrontation unfolded. Sarah's face twisted into an ugly sneer. My behavior? That's rich coming from you, Catherine. You, who shamelessly took Grandma's money, robbing the rest of us of our rightful inheritance. And for what? To give money to that girl who isn't even really part of this family? Gasps echoed around us. How dare you, I seethed. Lily is my daughter. She is as much a part of this family as anyone else. Sarah laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. Family? She's not even related to us. She's just some random kid you picked up, probably born to drug addicts or criminals. She has no right to our family's legacy. I was shaking with fury now. You don't know anything about Lily or her birth parents. And it doesn't matter. She is my daughter, and I love her more than anything in this world. Love? Sarah sneered. Is that what you call it when you use a child to steal from your own family? Face it, Catherine. You're nothing but a thief, using that girl to get Grandma's money. Well, we won't stand for it anymore. It's time you shared what rightfully belongs to all of us. I was about to respond when Jessica stepped forward, her face set in determination. That's enough, Sarah, she said firmly. You have no right to speak to Catherine like that, or to treat Lily this way. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. What, you're taking her side? Emily joined Jessica, standing beside me. We both are. Catherine has always been there for us, even when our own parents weren't. She raised us, Sarah. She deserves every penny of that inheritance. I felt a lump form in my throat, touched by my sister's support. Sarah's face contorted with rage. You traitors! How dare you! You're betraying the memory of our parents. Emily scoffed. Our parents? The same parents who neglected us and showered you with attention? The same parents who cut Catherine off for daring to want an education? Jessica nodded. And let's not forget, Sarah, how you took Mom and Dad's house and all their savings after they died. You didn't share a cent of that with any of us." I gasped, this information new to me. "What? Is that true, Sarah?" Sarah's face paled, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "It's true," Emily confirmed. "She got everything when Mom and Dad passed, and she never once offered to share." A wave of disappointment and anger washed over me. All this time, Sarah had been accusing me of theft when she'd done the very same thing. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady and firm, "I think it's time for you to leave." "You can't make me," she started, but Jessica cut her off. "Yes, she can. This is my house, and I want you to go. We're all tired of your tantrums and your cruelty. Until you can treat Catherine and Lily with respect, you're not welcome here." Sarah looked around, realizing she was outnumbered. With a final glare, she grabbed her son's hand and stormed off. As the gate slammed behind her, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I turned to my sisters, tears in my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. Later that night, I made a decision. The next day, I called my sisters and told them my plan. Despite their protests that I didn't need to do this, I insisted. I gave them the house and the cars, keeping the $1 million for our family. With the inheritance settled, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I transferred half of the money to a trust fund for Lily's future, ensuring she would always be taken care of. The other half, Michael and I decided to use for our family. We'd take that trip to Disney World that Lily had been dreaming of. We'd renovate our home, creating the perfect space for our little family. And maybe, just maybe, we'd look into adopting another child, giving Lily the sibling she'd always wanted. I never knew what a real family was supposed to be like until I was 7 years old. My name's Rebecca, but everyone calls me Becky. I grew up thinking that all families were like mine, cold, distant, and devoid of affection. My dad, a successful dentist with his own practice, and my mom, who worked as his nurse, provided for me materially, but that was about it. From as far back as I can remember, hugs and kisses were foreign concepts in our house. My parents never showed any warmth towards me, and I just assumed that's how things were supposed to be. We lived in a nice house, had good food on the table, and I always had clean clothes to wear. But something was missing, and I couldn't put my finger on it. Our family didn't socialize much. We rarely had visitors, and I never went to other kids' houses. It was just us, in our own little bubble. Looking back, I realize how isolated we were, but at the time, it seemed normal. Everything changed when I made friends with a girl in my class, Sarah. One day, she invited me over to her house after school. I remember walking into her home and feeling like I'd stepped into another world. Sarah's mom greeted us at the door with a warm smile. "Hi, sweetie," she said, pulling Sarah into a tight hug. "And you must be Becky. It's so nice to meet you." Before I knew what was happening, she had wrapped her arms around me too. I froze, not knowing how to react. The hug was nice, warm, comforting. All these new sensations washed over me, and I felt my eyes start to water. As we sat in Sarah's living room doing our homework, I couldn't help but notice how different everything felt. Sarah's mom would pop in occasionally, asking if we needed anything, ruffling Sarah's hair, or giving her a quick peck on the cheek. Each time, I felt a pang in my chest. When it was time for me to go home, Sarah's mom offered to drive me. As we pulled up to my house, she turned to me with a kind smile. "It was lovely having you over, Becky. You're welcome anytime." Then, to my absolute shock, she leaned over and kissed me on the cheek. "Good night, sweetie." I stumbled out of the car, my mind reeling. As I walked into my house, I saw my parents sitting in the living room, engrossed in their own activities. My mom was reading a book, while my dad was looking over some papers. "I'm home," I said hesitantly. My mom barely glanced up. "Did you finish your homework at Sarah's?" "Yes," I replied, then gathered my courage. "Mom, Dad, why don't you ever kiss me goodnight?" The silence that followed was deafening. My mom finally looked up from her book, her expression a mix of confusion and irritation. "What are you talking about, Rebecca? We feed you, clothe you, and provide a roof over your head. That should be enough for you." I felt my heart sink. "But that's enough, Rebecca," my dad interjected, not looking up from his papers. "Go to your room and get ready for bed." That night, as I lay in bed, I realized for the first time that something was wrong in our family. The warmth I had felt in Sarah's home was completely absent in mine. And as I drifted off to sleep, I wondered why my parents couldn't love me the way Sarah's mom loved her. As I grew older, the stark difference between my family and others became increasingly apparent. By the time I hit my teenage years, I had a clearer understanding of what was wrong. My mother was the root of the problem. Mom had always been a cold woman, seemingly incapable of showing emotion towards anyone, let alone affection. It wasn't just me she treated this way. I noticed she was equally distant with Dad. It was as if she was made of ice, impenetrable and unyielding. I started noticing more and more how burdened they seemed by their parental duties. They'd attend parent-teacher meetings, sure, but their faces always held barely concealed irritation, as if they'd rather be anywhere else. When my 16th birthday rolled around, I had a foolish hope that things might change. Maybe they'd surprise me with a heartfelt gift or even just a warm hug. Instead, I got a cold dose of reality. "Rebecca," Mom said over breakfast, her tone as flat as ever. "Your father and I need to discuss something with you." Dad cleared his throat. "We wanted to make it clear that you shouldn't expect us to pay for your college education. We're not required to do so." The words hit me like a slap in the face. I stared at them, unable to speak. "You're old enough now to start thinking about your future," Mom continued, not noticing or not caring about my shocked expression. "If you want to go to college, you'll need to figure out how to pay for it yourself." I nodded numbly, pushing away from the table. "Thanks for letting me know," I managed to say before retreating to my room. That day marked a turning point for me. I realized that if I wanted anything in life, I'd have to get it for myself. My parents weren't going to help me, they'd made that crystal clear. After graduating high school, I knew I needed to start earning more money. College seemed like a distant dream, but I was determined to make it happen someday. That's how I found myself working as a waitress at Joe's Diner, a small local restaurant just a few blocks from our house. Joe, the owner, was a middle-aged man with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and a belly that spoke of too many taste tests in the kitchen. When I applied for the job, he looked me up and down with a grin that made me slightly uncomfortable. Well, he said, stroking his chin. "You'll definitely attract customers with those looks, sweetheart. You're hired." 3 months into my new job, my life took another dramatic turn. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was getting ready for my afternoon shift when my parents called me down for breakfast. This was unusual. We rarely ate together, let alone had conversations over meals. As I sat down, I noticed my parents exchanging glances. My mother, her face as impassive as ever, spoke first. "Rebecca, your father and I have some news," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "We've decided to sell the house and move to Europe. The sale will be finalized next month." I waited for them to continue, to tell me about their plans for me. But the silence stretched on. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "So, what about me?" I asked, my voice small. "Am I coming with you?" My parents exchanged another look, this one tinged with what seemed like annoyance. My father cleared his throat. "Rebecca, you're an adult," he said, his tone matter of fact. "It's time for you to find your own place to live. We've fulfilled our duty. You're of legal age now, which means you need to figure things out on your own." Anger and disbelief warred inside me. "This is my home too," I shouted, standing up so quickly my chair toppled over. "You can't just throw me out." My father actually laughed, a cold, humorless sound that sent chills down my spine. "This house is my property, Becky. You have no claim to it." Tears stung my eyes as the full weight of their callousness hit me. Without another word, I ran upstairs and started throwing my belongings into a suitcase. As I was about to leave, my parents stopped me at the door. "Show us what's in the suitcase," my mother demanded, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious? You think I'm stealing from you?" "We just want to make sure you're not taking anything valuable," my father said, as if it was the most reasonable request in the world. That was the last straw. Years of pent-up anger and hurt came pouring out of me in a torrent of curse words and accusations. I screamed at them, calling them every nasty name I could think of, telling them they were the worst parents in the world. They didn't even flinch. When I ran out of steam, my mother simply opened the door and gestured for me to leave. With nowhere else to go, I headed to Joe's diner for my shift, dragging my suitcase behind me. Joe looked up from behind the counter, his eyebrows shooting up when he saw my suitcase. "Becky, what's going on?" I tried to keep it together, I really did. But as soon as he asked, the dam broke. Tears started streaming down my face as I told him everything, how my parents were selling the house, moving to Europe, and had kicked me out without a care in the world. Joe listened, his face growing more concerned with each word. When I finished, he reached out and took my hand. "Oh, sweetheart, that's terrible. Listen, I might be able to help you out." For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. But then I saw the look in his eyes, and my stomach dropped. "You could stay at my place," he continued, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of my hand. "But you'd need to show me how grateful you are." I yanked my hand away, disgust replacing my sadness. "Are you kidding me?" Joe's face hardened. "Fine, have it your way. But if you're not going to take my offer, you can consider yourself fired. I don't need your drama in my diner." I rented a room at a cheap hostel for the night. As I sat on the lumpy bed, I pulled out my phone and opened my parents' social media pages. I'd never paid much attention to them before, but now I scrolled through their friends lists desperately, looking for any relatives who might be willing to help me. One by one, I reached out to them, explaining my situation. And one by one, they turned me down. Some were polite about it, others less so, but the result was the same: no one wanted to take me in. Just when I was about to give up hope, I got a message from someone I'd never met, my mother's aunt, Evelyn. She lived in another state but said she'd be willing to let me stay with her for a while. With no other options, I used the last of my money to buy a bus ticket to Aunt Evelyn's town. When I finally arrived, Aunt Evelyn was waiting for me at the bus station. She looked a lot like my mother, the same sharp features and steely eyes. "Rebecca," she said, nodding at me. "Welcome." As we drove to her house, Aunt Evelyn laid out the ground rules. "You can stay in the spare room. I expect you to keep it clean and help out around the house. And you'll need to find a job, I'm not running a charity here." The next few weeks fell into a routine. I found a job at a local cafe, worked long hours, and spent my free time cleaning Aunt Evelyn's house and cooking meals. She was always polite but distant, watching me with a wariness I couldn't understand. One evening, as I was dusting the living room, my eyes fell on a framed photograph I hadn't noticed before. It showed a young man with a bright smile, his arm around a younger version of Aunt Evelyn. "Aunt Evelyn?" I called out. "Who's this in the photo?" I heard a sharp intake of breath behind me. When I turned around, I saw something I never expected, tears in Aunt Evelyn's eyes. That's my son," she said, her voice cracking. "He died in a car accident 10 years ago." I put down the duster and did something I'd never done before: I hugged her. To my surprise, she hugged me back, her body shaking with silent sobs. When we finally pulled apart, Aunt Evelyn looked at me with wonder. "You know, I always thought you'd be just like your mother, cold and unfeeling." I shook my head, feeling my own tears welling up. "And I thought you were just like her too." I guess we were both wrong. As the days passed, Aunt Evelyn and I grew closer. The warmth I'd always craved from my parents, I found in her. We'd spend evenings talking, sharing stories, and slowly healing the wounds of our pasts. For the first time in my life, I felt truly loved and accepted. One evening, about 2 months after I'd arrived, Aunt Evelyn sat me down with a serious look on her face. My heart skipped a beat, fearing the worst. Was she going to ask me to leave? "Rebecca," she began, her voice soft but firm. "I want to talk to you about something important. When my son died, I set aside money for his college education. It's been sitting in an account for years now, and, well, I've been thinking." She reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "I want you to have it, for your education." I stared at her, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. "What? But that's your son's money. I can't." "You can, and you will," Aunt Evelyn said firmly. "My boy would have wanted it to be used for something good. And you, Rebecca, you deserve a chance at a better life." Without hesitation, I threw my arms around her, sobbing into her shoulder. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you so much." And just like that, my life changed again. I enrolled in the local college as a business major, determined to make Aunt Evelyn proud. We settled into a new routine. I'd go to classes during the day, work part-time at the cafe in the evenings, and spend my nights studying at the kitchen table while Aunt Evelyn knitted in her favorite armchair. For 2 years, life was good. Better than good, actually. It was everything I'd ever dreamed of. I had a loving family, I was getting an education, and I felt like I was finally on the path to a bright future. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when there was a knock at the door. I was home alone, working on a paper for my marketing class. Assuming it was a package delivery, I opened the door without a second thought. The woman standing on the porch made my blood run cold. Her hair was grayer, her face more lined, but there was no mistaking those cold, hard eyes. "Hello, Rebecca," my mother said, her voice as emotionless as ever. I gripped the doorframe, my knees suddenly weak. "Mom, what are you doing here?" She looked past me into the house, her lips pursed. "I need to speak with Evelyn. Is she home?" I shook my head, still in shock. "She's out running errands. She'll be back soon." My mother nodded curtly. "I'll wait, then." Before I could protest, she brushed past me into the house. I closed the door, my mind racing. What was she doing here? After 2 years of silence, why now? As we sat in uncomfortable silence in the living room, I took a good look at my mother. She wasn't the well-put-together woman I remembered. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair unkempt. There was a desperation in her eyes that I'd never seen before. Finally, unable to bear the tension any longer, I broke the silence. "Why are you here, Mom?" She met my gaze, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of emotion. But it was gone so quickly, I might have imagined it. "I need help," she said flatly. "Your father and I were no longer together. We moved to Italy, as planned. Your father, he met someone else. A younger woman. He left me for her." Before I could respond, we heard the front door open. Aunt Evelyn walked in, her arms full of grocery bags. When she saw my mother, she froze. "Helen," Aunt Evelyn said, her voice clipped. "What brings you here after all this time?" My mother straightened her posture, trying to regain some of her old authority. "Evelyn, I need your help. I've fallen on hard times." Aunt Evelyn's eyebrows shot up. "Oh? And what about your comfortable life in Italy?" "Things didn't work out as planned," my mother replied, her voice tight. "John left me for another woman. I have nowhere else to go. You're my only option, Evelyn." Aunt Evelyn let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, that's rich coming from you, Helen. Do you remember when I needed your help? When I lost my son and couldn't even afford a proper funeral? Where were you then?" I saw my mother flinch, but she quickly regained her composure. "That was different." Different? Aunt Evelyn interrupted, her voice rising. "How was it different?" "Because it wasn't you who needed help." The tension in the room was unbearable. I felt like I should say something, do something, but I was frozen in place, watching this family drama unfold. My mother's eyes suddenly locked onto me. "Rebecca," she said, her voice taking on an edge of desperation. "You owe me, I'm your mother." I felt a surge of anger rise within me. "I owe you? You kicked me out without a second thought. You told me I was on my own. And now you have the nerve to say I owe you?" "I raised you," my mother began, but I cut her off. "You provided the bare minimum," I spat out. "Food, clothes, a roof over my head. But you never gave me what I really needed: love, support, affection. You were cold and distant my entire life, and when I needed you most, you threw me out like I was nothing." My mother's face paled. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't care. "And now you come here, expecting help? Expecting me to forget everything you've done, or rather, everything you didn't do? Well, guess what, Mom? I'm doing just fine without you. I found someone who actually cares about me, who supports me, who loves me. I don't need you anymore." The room fell silent after my outburst. Aunt Evelyn stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "I think it's time for you to leave, Helen," she said firmly. My mother looked between us, realization dawning on her face. Without another word, she stood up and walked to the door. As the door closed behind her, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I turned to Aunt Evelyn, who pulled me into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," she murmured, stroking my hair. "You stood up for yourself. You're stronger than you know." As I cried into her shoulder, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, anger, and strangely, a sense of freedom. For the first time in my life, I had confronted my mother and spoken my truth. It hurt, but it also felt like the beginning of healing. About a week after the incident, I was walking across campus when I overheard a group of my classmates whispering and glancing in my direction. As I got closer, I caught snippets of their conversation. "That's her, the one whose mother. Can you believe she'd abandon her own mom?" My stomach dropped. How did they know about what happened? I quickened my pace, my cheeks burning with embarrassment and anger. It didn't take long to figure out what was going on. My mother had taken up residence in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town and had started showing up at the college, telling anyone who would listen about how her ungrateful daughter had abandoned her in her time of need. For days, she sat on a bench near the main entrance, accosting students and staff alike with her tale of woe. My classmates began to whisper behind my back, some giving me looks of pity, others of judgment. I tried to ignore it, to focus on my studies, but it was hard. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling class where I could feel everyone's eyes on me, I broke down and told Aunt Evelyn everything. The next day, with Aunt Evelyn by my side for moral support, I approached a group of my classmates who were huddled near the campus coffee shop. I took a deep breath and spoke up. "Hey, guys. I need to talk to you about something. About my mother." They turned to look at me, their expressions a mix of curiosity and wariness. And so, I began to talk. I told them everything, about my childhood in a cold, loveless home, about being kicked out the moment I turned 18, about struggling to survive on my own until Aunt Evelyn took me in. As I spoke, I saw their expressions change from skepticism to shock, and finally, to understanding. By the time I finished, there were tears in more than a few eyes. One of my classmates, Sarah, stepped forward and hugged me. "Becky, I'm so sorry. We had no idea. Your mom, she made it sound so different." Word spread quickly after that. My classmates, now armed with the truth, became my fiercest defenders. When my mother tried to approach them with her tales of abandonment, they shut her down. The college security, alerted to the situation, began escorting her off campus whenever she showed up. A week later, I heard through the grapevine that my mother had given up and left town. She had returned to our hometown, taking a job as a nurse at the local clinic and renting a small apartment. I felt relieved and calm. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. After the tumultuous events with my mother, I found my footing again and threw myself back into my studies with renewed determination. My grades improved, and I was on track to graduate with honors. One ordinary afternoon, as I was reviewing notes for an upcoming exam, my phone buzzed with a notification. A message from an unexpected sender, my father. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, curiosity and apprehension mingling in my chest. The message read, "Rebecca, I hope this finds you well. I'm reaching out because I have a proposition for you. I've remarried in Italy and have a young son now. We could use some help with childcare. Would you consider coming to stay with us? You could be a nanny for your half-brother. I know you probably don't have many prospects there, so this could be a great opportunity for you." I stared at the screen, a mixture of disbelief and amusement washing over me. After years of silence, this was what he had to offer. A job as an unpaid nanny for a half-brother I'd never met? The audacity was almost comical. Without hesitation, I typed a single word in response, "No." Seconds later, my phone buzzed again. My father, clearly taken aback by my curt reply, began asking questions. Where was I living? How was I supporting myself? What was I doing with my life? A mischievous smile played on my lips as I scrolled through my photo gallery. I selected a picture of myself on campus, beaming in front of the business school building, and another of me laughing in Aunt Evelyn's cozy kitchen. I sent these images without comment. The response was immediate. Message after message flooded in, each more frantic than the last. How had I managed to go to college? Where was I getting the money? Whose house do I live in? I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. Then I typed out one final message, "That's none of your business." With a sense of finality, I blocked his number. Months passed, and before I knew it, graduation day arrived. As I stood in line, waiting to receive my diploma, my eyes scanned the audience. There, in the third row, sat Aunt Evelyn, her face glowing with pride. She clapped the loudest when my name was called, and I couldn't help but beam as I crossed the stage. Looking at Aunt Evelyn, I made a silent vow. I would build a life that would make her proud. I would take the love and support she had given me and pay it forward. I would show her, and the world, that family isn't just about blood, it's about choice, love, and commitment. My name's Rachel, and boy, do I have a story to tell you. It all started after I graduated college and landed a job as a flight attendant. Fresh-faced and eager, I was ready to take on the world, one flight at a time. It was on one of those routine flights that I met him, Jack. Tall, handsome, with a smile that could light up the cockpit. Yeah, you guessed it, he was the pilot. Our eyes met as I was doing the pre-flight checks, and I swear, it was like something out of a cheesy romance movie. From that moment on, Jack and I were inseparable. We'd grab coffee during layovers, swap stories about passengers, and before I knew it, we were dating. It was a whirlwind romance, the kind you read about in books or see in movies. We were young, in love, and the sky was literally the limit. 6 months after we met, Jack proposed. It wasn't anything fancy, just us, on the beach, during a stopover in Hawaii. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Jack got down on one knee, sand sticking to his uniform pants, and pulled out a ring. We got married in a small ceremony a few months later. Life was perfect, or so I thought. It was about a year into our marriage. I was working a long-haul flight from New York to Tokyo. Everything was going smoothly until we hit some turbulence over the Pacific. I was in the middle of the cabin, making sure everyone was secure. That's when it happened. The plane suddenly dropped, like the bottom had fallen out of the sky. I was thrown off my feet, my body slamming into the overhead compartments before I hit the floor. Pain, blinding, white-hot pain shot through my back. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. Panic set in as I realized something was seriously wrong. The rest of the flight was a blur. Emergency landing in Anchorage, being rushed to the hospital, doctors poking and prodding. The diagnosis came like a punch to the gut, severe spinal injury. Just like that, my life in the sky was over. The airline was good about it, I'll give them that. They paid for my medical bills, offered me a hefty compensation. Jack was my rock through it all. He'd sit by my hospital bed, hold my hand as I went through physical therapy. "We'll get through this, Ratch," he'd say. "Together." And we did. Slowly but surely, I learned to walk again. But flying? That was off the table. The doctors were clear, any more stress on my spine could lead to permanent damage. So, I had to reinvent myself. The airline offered me a position in their ground staff, and I took it. It wasn't the same as being up in the air, but it was something. With the compensation money, Jack and I decided to buy a house. A beautiful, spacious place in a nice neighborhood. It was more than we needed, really, but Jack insisted. "You deserve this, Rachel," he said. "After everything you've been through." As Jack and I settled into our new house, I thought we were finally getting our happily ever after. But life has a way of throwing curveballs, and mine came in the form of my sister-in-law, Sarah. From the moment I met her, I could tell Sarah didn't like me. She was Jack's younger sister, married with a 4-year-old son, but there was always this edge to her. Like she was constantly sizing me up, looking for flaws. I remember the first time she visited our new house. Her eyes darted around, taking in every detail. "Well, isn't this nice?" she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You certainly landed on your feet after that accident, didn't you, Rachel? Some people have all the luck, I guess. Even when they fall, they land in a pile of money." I bit my tongue, not wanting to start a fight. Jack had always been close to his sister, despite her difficult personality. I didn't want to be the one to come between them. Over the next few months, Sarah's visits became more frequent, and her comments more biting. Every time she came over, it was like walking on eggshells. I tried to be the bigger person, to ignore her jabs and passive-aggressive remarks. But it was wearing me down. One day, after a particularly nasty comment about how I was milking my injury, I confronted Jack about it. "I can't take it anymore," I said, tears of frustration in my eyes. "Your sister hates me, and I don't know why." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's just Sarah. She's always been jealous of others. It's not you, it's her. I'll talk to her, okay? She needs to back off." But talking to Sarah didn't seem to help. If anything, it made her more resentful. She'd make a show of being polite when Jack was around, but the moment he was out of earshot, the claws would come out. It all came to a head about a year after we moved in. Sarah showed up unannounced one afternoon, all smiles and sweetness. I was immediately on guard. "Rachel, darling," she cooed, and I had to resist the urge to check for flying pigs. "I have a huge favor to ask." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "Well, you see, Tommy's 5th birthday is coming up," she said, referring to her son. "And I was wondering, could we possibly have his party here?" I must have looked shocked, because she quickly added, "It's just, your house is so beautiful, and I have some important business contacts I want to impress. It would mean so much to me." I hesitated. On one hand, this was Sarah, the woman who'd made my life miserable for the past year. On the other, maybe this was an olive branch? A chance to finally build a better relationship? Against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. In the weeks leading up to Tommy's birthday, I threw myself into party planning with gusto. I spent hours scouring the internet for party ideas, saving Pinterest boards, and watching YouTube tutorials. I wanted everything to be perfect, from the decorations to the food, right down to the party favors. The day before the party, I was a whirlwind of activity. I'd ordered beautiful decorations, balloons in Tommy's favorite colors, a custom banner, and even hired a face painter. The snacks were all prepared, a mix of kid-friendly treats and some fancier hors d'oeuvres for the adults. I'd even baked the cake myself, a 3-tiered masterpiece covered in fondant and decorated with little rocket ships. Tommy was going through a space phase. As I was putting the finishing touches on the living room decorations, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. Everything ready for tomorrow? Remember, first impressions are everything. I rolled my eyes, but texted back a cheerful, all set. It's going to be great. When morning finally came, I was up at the crack of dawn, double and triple checking everything. Jack had an early flight, so he kissed me goodbye and wished me luck before heading out. "You've got this," he said, giving me a reassuring smile. "And remember, it's just a kid's birthday party. Don't stress too much." I nodded, but inside, I knew it was more than just a party. It was my chance to finally prove myself to Sarah, to show her that I was a valuable part of this family. As the clock ticked closer to party time, I got dressed in my nicest outfit, a pretty floral dress that I hoped struck the right balance between casual and put together. I did my hair and makeup, wanting to look my best for Sarah's important business contacts. Just as I was giving the living room one final once-over, the doorbell rang. My heart leapt into my throat. This was it. Showtime. I opened the door with a bright smile, ready to welcome Sarah and Tommy. "Happy birthday, big guy," I said, kneeling down to Tommy's level. Sarah breezed past me, her eyes scanning the decorated living room. "Well, it looks adequate," she said, her tone making it clear that adequate was a stretch. I bit back a retort and instead held out the beautifully wrapped gift for Tommy. "Here you go, sweetie. I hope you like it." Sarah snatched the gift from my hands before Tommy could reach for it. "We'll open presents later," she said curtly. Then, her eyes locked onto mine, a strange glint in them. "Rachel, dear, I need you to go to the city park and take a nice long walk." "Say, 2 or 3 hours?" I blinked, sure I had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" Sarah's smile tightened. "You heard me. I'll meet the guests myself." You're superfluous here." The words hit me like a slap. "Sarah, this is my home. I'm not going anywhere. I've spent weeks preparing for this party. I thought we could finally build a good relationship." Sarah's laughter cut through the air, sharp and mocking. "Oh, Rachel, you're so naive. I have no interest in being friends with you. None whatsoever." Before I could process what was happening, Sarah had grabbed my arm and was pushing me towards the door. I tried to resist, but she was surprisingly strong. "Sarah, stop. What are you doing?" With a final shove, I found myself stumbling out onto the front porch. The door slammed behind me, the sound echoing in the quiet neighborhood. I stood there, stunned, my mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. I patted my pockets, realizing with growing horror that I had nothing but my phone. As if reading my thoughts, the door opened again. Sarah appeared, holding my purse and car keys. "Here," she said, tossing them at my feet. "Now get out of here. I don't want you embarrassing me in front of my friends." The door slammed shut again, leaving me alone in the driveway, staring at my own front door in disbelief. Numbly, I picked up my purse and keys and got into my car. My hands were shaking as I tried to figure out what to do. I dialed Jack's number, praying he'd pick up, but it went straight to voicemail. Of course, he was on a flight. In desperation, I called my mother-in-law. Surely she'd see reason. "Linda, thank God," I said, my voice cracking. "Sarah's thrown me out of my own house. She's having Tommy's party without me. You've got to help me." There was a pause, and then Linda's voice came back, cold and dismissive. "Rachel, dear, I'm sure you're exaggerating. I'll be there soon to celebrate with my daughter and grandson. This is their day. Why don't you just stay out for a while?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Linda, please." But she had already hung up. Tears of frustration and hurt welled up in my eyes. I wanted to march back into that house and throw everyone out. But then I thought of Tommy, innocent in all this, and Jack, who would be devastated if I caused a scene with his family. With shaking hands, I scrolled through my contacts and called Sarah's husband, Mark. "Rachel?" Mark's voice was surprised. "What's up?" I took a deep breath and explained everything that had happened. Mark listened in stunned silence. I had no idea, he said when I finished. Rachel, I'm so sorry. I didn't even know Sarah was planning to have the party at your place. I'm stuck at work, but I'll be there in about 3 hours. Can you hang tight until then? I agreed, not knowing what else to do. Feeling lost and betrayed, I drove to a nearby cafe. As I sat there, nursing a coffee I couldn't taste, I tried to make sense of what had just happened. How had my attempt at building bridges turned into this nightmare? After what felt like an eternity, Mark's car pulled into the cafe parking lot. We drove up to my house in silence and walked in without knocking. The scene that greeted us was surreal. My living room was full of people I didn't recognize, all dressed to the nines. In the center of it all was Sarah, holding court like a queen at her coronation. Mark's voice cut through the chatter like a knife. What the hell is going on here? The room fell silent. Sarah's head whipped around, her face draining of color when she saw us. She tried to pull Mark aside, her voice low and urgent. Please, not in front of everyone. I can explain everything. But Mark wasn't having it. No, Sarah, I want answers now. Under the weight of Mark's glare and the curious stares of the guests, Sarah finally cracked. Fine, she hissed. I invited Jason and his parents, okay? She gestured to a smug-looking man in an expensive suit. They're very influential, and they promised to help me with my business venture. I couldn't pass up the opportunity. Mark's face reddened. So you used our son's birthday as a networking event? And what about my parents? Sarah's next words made my blood run cold. Your parents? Please. They're not exactly the kind of people who can help us get ahead. What was the point of inviting them? A tense silence fell over the room. Then, to my horror, Jason, Sarah's ex, raised his champagne glass in a mocking toast. No hard feelings, Mark, he said with a smirk. That was the last straw. Mark lunged at Jason, and suddenly my carefully planned party devolved into chaos. People were shouting, glasses were breaking, and in the middle of it all was Tommy, looking confused and scared. The party dissolved quickly after that. Guests hurried out, muttering apologies and avoiding eye contact. But Sarah wasn't done. Instead of apologizing to Mark or me, she cornered Jason and his parents, groveling and making excuses. I'm so sorry about this, she simpered. My husband doesn't understand how important networking is. I hope this hasn't ruined our chances of working together. As the last of the guests trickled out, I was left standing in my wrecked living room, surrounded by the ruins of the party I'd worked so hard to plan. Mark was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands, while Sarah continued to make excuses. Tommy had retreated to a corner, clutching the gift I'd given him earlier, looking lost and confused. When Jack finally returned from his trip, I broke down and told him everything. He pulled me into a tight hug, and for the first time since the party, I felt safe. I promise you, he whispered, I won't let her treat you like this ever again. You have my full support. True to his word, Jack called Sarah that very evening. I could hear his raised voice from the other room, words like disrespectful and inexcusable cutting through the air. When he hung up, he looked drained but resolute. She won't be bothering us again anytime soon, he assured me. But the drama was far from over. Over the next few weeks, we heard through the family grapevine that Sarah and Mark's marriage was imploding. Apparently, Mark's suspicions about Sarah's relationship with her ex-boyfriend, Jason, had reached a boiling point. One evening, Mark called us, sounding desperate. I found messages, he said, his voice cracking. Hundreds of them, between Sarah and Jason. They'd been in constant contact before and after the party. My heart sank for Mark. I'm so sorry, I said, not knowing what else to offer. That's not all, Mark continued. I did a paternity test on Tommy. I had to know. The situation was spiraling out of control. To make matters worse, Jack's parents seemed to have taken Sarah's side in all of this. One afternoon, I received a scathing call from Linda, my mother-in-law. "How dare you turn my children against each other," she screeched into the phone. "You've torn this family apart with your selfish behavior." I was stunned. "Linda, I didn't do anything. Sarah." "Don't you dare blame Sarah," she interrupted. "She was just trying to better herself and her family. You're nothing but a self-centered homewrecker." Then came the day Mark received the paternity test results. He showed up at our doorstep, looking shell-shocked. "Tommy's mine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's really mine." While this should have been a relief, it only seemed to complicate matters further. When Sarah found out about the test, she exploded. "How dare you question my fidelity?" she shrieked at Mark during a confrontation we unfortunately witnessed. "Everything I've done has been for us, for our family." Mark scoffed. "Sneaking around with your ex is for our family?" "You don't understand," she yelled back. "Jason's mother has connections. I was trying to build a network, to create opportunities for us. But you," she pointed an accusing finger at Mark, "you're too much of a loser to see the bigger picture." The argument escalated, with Sarah hurling insults and accusations. And then, in a move that left us all stunned, Sarah stormed out. She returned an hour later with packed bags, Tommy clutching her hand. "I'm done," she announced coldly. "I'm going to build my empire, with or without you. You can keep your precious paternity test. I'll be back for Tommy when I'm successful." With that, she walked out, leaving a devastated Mark and a confused Tommy behind. Jack and I exchanged a look, silently agreeing that our lives had just become infinitely more complicated. We had chosen our side in this family war, and there was no going back now. The following months were a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional turmoil. Jack and I found ourselves thrust into the role of impromptu babysitters, often looking after Tommy while Mark dealt with lawyers and court appearances. I couldn't help but feel a gnawing guilt. If I hadn't interrupted that party, would any of this have happened? One evening, as we were putting Tommy to bed after a long day of distracting him with games and stories, I confessed my feelings to Jack. "I can't help thinking this is all my fault," I whispered, fighting back tears. Jack pulled me close, his voice firm but gentle. "Rachel, listen to me. None of this is your fault. Sarah's always been like this, spoiled, selfish, unable to see or respect boundaries. You were just trying to be kind. She's the one who took advantage of that kindness." Finally, after what felt like an eternity of legal battles, the divorce was finalized. Mark was awarded full custody of Tommy, with Sarah granted limited visitation rights. It felt like we could all finally breathe again. Then, to our surprise and joy, I found out I was pregnant. It wasn't an easy pregnancy. My old spinal injury from the plane accident made things complicated. I had to wear a supportive corset constantly, and there were days when the pain was almost unbearable. But every time I felt the baby move, every time I saw the grainy image on the ultrasound screen, I knew it was worth it. Jack was over the moon, doting on me hand and foot. We thought we'd finally put the drama behind us. We were wrong. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. The doorbell rang, and Jack went to answer it. I heard his sharp intake of breath before I saw her. Sarah, standing on our doorstep, looking nothing like the polished, ambitious woman who'd stormed out of our lives years ago. "I need to talk to Mark," she said, her voice hoarse. "Please." Jack called Mark, who arrived within minutes, his face a mask of wary confusion. Sarah launched into her story as soon as he walked in. "I've made a horrible mistake," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "The business, it all fell apart. Jason, he used me. When the project failed, he just left. I need help. They're demanding repayment. I thought maybe you could be a guarantor for a loan." The room fell silent. Tommy had stopped playing, watching the adults with wide, confused eyes. Mark took a deep breath. "No, Sarah," he said finally. "I won't be your guarantor, and I won't take you back. You made your choice years ago." Sarah's face crumpled. But what about Tommy? Don't you want him to have his mother back?" Mark's voice was steel. Tommy has been just fine without you. We've moved on, Sarah. I think you should too. Just when we thought the dust had settled, Sarah made her grand reappearance. It was a crisp autumn morning, and I was enjoying a rare moment of peace, sipping herbal tea on the porch, my very pregnant belly making even this simple task a bit of a challenge. The sound of tires screeching broke the tranquility. Sarah burst out of her car, her face a mask of desperation and anger. "Jack," she screamed, storming up our walkway. "I need to talk to you." Jack appeared at the door, his face hardening at the sight of his sister. "Sarah, you need to leave. Now." But Sarah was beyond reason. She pointed an accusing finger at me. "This is all her fault. If she hadn't come into our lives, none of this would have happened." I felt a familiar knot of guilt forming in my stomach, but Jack's firm voice cut through my doubts. "That's enough, Sarah," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Rachel has done nothing but support this family, even when you tried to tear it apart. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. If you come here again, I'll call the police." For a moment, I thought Sarah might lunge at us. Instead, she spun on her heel and marched back to her car. As she peeled away, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The next morning, we woke to find Sarah had set up a tent on our front lawn. She'd fashioned a crude sign, "Family abandonment in progress, shame on you." "This is ridiculous," Jack muttered, reaching for his phone. True to his word, he called the police. The officers were sympathetic but explained that as long as Sarah remained on public property, there wasn't much they could do. They did, however, issue her a warning about harassment. This standoff continued for days. Sarah would shout at us whenever we left the house, beg Jack to help her when he came home from work, and tried to guilt-trip me about stealing her family. Finally, after a week of this nightmare, we got a call from Linda. "I've convinced Sarah to come home," she said, her voice tired. "I'm sorry for everything. I see now that she needs help, not enabling." True to Linda's word, Sarah packed up her tent that evening. As she drove away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. But the peace was short-lived. Jack found me in the nursery later that night, absently folding and refolding onesies. "Ratch," he said gently, "I've been thinking. Maybe we should sell the house. Move somewhere Sarah doesn't know about. Somewhere we can raise our baby in peace." The next few months were a whirlwind of real estate agents, packing boxes, and doctor's appointments. We found a smaller house in a quiet neighborhood across town, right next to a good school and a public library. It was perfect. Epilogue. It's been 5 years since we moved. Lily, our daughter, is a happy, healthy kindergartner, and Tommy, now a teenager, is a frequent visitor and doting cousin. Mark has found happiness with a kind woman who loves Tommy like her own. We hear from Linda occasionally. She tells us Sarah is working 2 jobs to pay off her debts and seems to be getting her life together. Part of me hopes that one day, she'll be ready to be a part of our lives again. But for now, we're content. My name's Pamela, and up until recently, I was just your average workaholic advertising specialist. I lived and breathed my job at this fancy agency in the heart of the city. You know the type, big glass building, top floor office with a view that'd make your head spin. I was good at what I did, damn good actually. The agency relied on me for pretty much everything. I was your typical career-focused woman in her early 30s. No husband, no kids, just me and my work. My tiny apartment was more like a pit stop between office hours than an actual home. I'd roll in late at night, crash for a few hours, then head right back out. Rinse and repeat. My boss, well, she was something else. Picture a 60-something woman with more ambition than empathy. She owned the agency, and boy, did she let everyone know it. Her name was Vivian, but we all called her Mrs. Crawford behind her back. To her face? It was all yes, ma'am, and right away, ma'am. One particular Monday morning, I dragged myself into the office, feeling like death warmed over. I'd caught some nasty bug over the weekend, but deadlines wait for no one, especially not in Vivian's world. I was hunched over my computer, trying to focus on the quarterly report through my fever haze, when Vivian's voice cut through the office like a knife. "Pamela, my office, now." I stumbled to her door, knowing full well what was coming. The report was late, and Vivian Crawford did not do late. "What the hell is this?" she snarled, waving a printout in my face. "You call this a report? Any 5-year-old could put together something more coherent than this garbage." "I'm sorry, Ms. Crawford," I mumbled, my head pounding. "I've been sick, Anne." "Sick?" she scoffed. "You think clients care if you're sick? You think I built this agency by taking sick days? You're useless, Pamela. Utterly useless." Her words hit me like a slap. I'd poured my heart and soul into this job for years, sacrificed everything for it. And this was what I got in return? I don't know if it was the fever or just years of pent-up frustration, but something in me snapped. Tears welled up in my eyes, and before I knew it, I was bolting out of her office, past the shocked faces of my coworkers, and into the elevator. The elevator dinged, and as the doors slid open, I came face to face with a pair of concerned brown eyes. "Hey, are you okay?" a deep voice asked. I looked up, startled by the voice. Standing there was a man about my age, with kind eyes and a concerned expression. I must have looked a sight, because his brow furrowed even deeper when he saw my face. "I'm fine," I stammered, trying to regain my composure. But the tears betrayed me, streaming down my cheeks. "You don't look fine," he said gently. "Look, I know it's none of my business, but would you like to grab a coffee? Sometimes talking to a stranger can help." I hesitated. I never did things like this, running out of work, crying in elevators, accepting invitations from strangers. But something about his genuine concern broke through my defenses. "Actually," I sniffled, "that sounds nice." We made our way to a little cafe just down the street. As we sat down with our coffees, he introduced himself as Jake. "So," he said, settling into his chair, "want to tell me what's got you so upset?" I found myself pouring out the whole story, how I'd been feeling ill, how I was behind on my work, and how my boss had torn into me. I was careful not to mention any names or specifics about the company, but I didn't hold back on describing how devastated I felt. "Wow," Jake said when I finished. "That's rough. No one deserves to be treated like that, especially when they're sick." We ended up talking for over an hour. Jake told me about his own job in finance, his hobbies, his dog. It was easy, comfortable conversation, and I found myself laughing, despite the awful morning I'd had. As we were getting ready to leave, Jake hesitated. "Listen, Pamela. I know we just met, but I'd really like to see you again. Maybe we could grab dinner sometime?" I surprised myself by saying yes without hesitation. We exchanged numbers, and as I watched him walk away, I felt a flutter of excitement in my chest. Over the next few weeks, Jake and I started seeing each other regularly. We'd meet for dinner after work, or spend weekends exploring the city. With each date, I found myself falling harder for him. He was kind, funny, and supportive, everything I'd been missing in my life. At work, things were, well, they were what they always were. Vivian was still Vivian, demanding and critical. But somehow, it didn't bother me as much anymore. Knowing I had Jake to talk to at the end of the day made it all more bearable. One night, about a year after we'd met, Jake took me to a fancy restaurant. As we finished our dessert, he pulled out a small velvet box and opened it, revealing a beautiful diamond ring. "Pamela, will you marry me?" Happy tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded enthusiastically. Yes, of course I'll marry you." As Jake slipped the ring on my finger, I felt like I was floating on air. Everything was perfect. Jake was perfect. Our life together would be perfect. The weeks following our engagement were a whirlwind of happiness. One evening, as we cuddled on the couch in my apartment, Jake brought up something I hadn't even considered. "Babe," he said, running his fingers through my hair, "I think it's time you met my mom." She's been asking to meet you. How about this weekend? We can drive out to her place. That Saturday, we pulled up to a house that made my jaw drop. It was huge, easily 3 times the size of the house I grew up in. The door swung open, and I froze. Standing there, looking just as shocked as I felt, was Vivian Crawford, my boss, Jake's mother. "Mom," Jake said warmly, oblivious to the tension, "this is Pamela, my fiancée." Vivian's eyes narrowed as they swept over me. "Pamela," she said, her voice cold. "What a surprise." "Jake, darling, surely you can do better than this." She waved her hand dismissively in my direction. "With your money, your position, you could have any woman you want. Why settle for someone from such a modest background?" I felt like I'd been slapped. Jake's arm tightened around me. "Mom," he said, his voice hard, "I love Pamela. She's the best thing that's ever happened to me. I'm marrying her, with or without your approval." Vivian's face darkened, but Jake didn't give her a chance to respond. He turned to me, his eyes softening. "I'm so sorry about this, Pam. Let's go." As we drove away, I finally found my voice. "Jake," I said shakily, "there's something I need to tell you." I spilled everything, how Vivian was my boss, how she'd treated me at work, the incident that led to me meeting Jake in the first place. Jake listened silently, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I finished, he pulled the car over and turned to face me. "Pamela," he said firmly, "I want you to know that this changes nothing. I love you, and I'm on your side, no matter what." His words were like a lifeline, and I clung to them desperately. We decided to move forward with our wedding plans, despite Vivian's disapproval. Jake and I found a small apartment together, and for a while, everything seemed okay. But at work, things were getting worse. Vivian's treatment of me had always been harsh, but now it was downright cruel. She'd humiliate me in meetings, mock my ideas in front of clients, and pile on impossible deadlines. Yet she never fired me. I was too valuable to the agency, and we both knew it. I'd come home every night exhausted and demoralized. Jake was always there, supportive and loving, but I could see the toll it was taking on him too. He'd confront his mother, begging her to treat me better, but it only seemed to make things worse. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I'd been working on a massive presentation for weeks, pouring every ounce of creativity and effort I had into it. As I stood in front of the management team, including Vivian, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this time I'd finally earn her approval. I was halfway through my pitch when Vivian's cold voice cut through the room. "Is this a joke, Pamela? This is what you've been working on for weeks? This is amateur work at best. I've seen interns produce better concepts than this drivel." The room fell silent. I could feel the pitying looks from my colleagues, but no one dared to speak up against Vivian. "I can revise it," I stammered, fighting back tears. Vivian waved her hand dismissively. "Don't bother. We'll have someone competent handle it from here. You're dismissed." I fled the conference room, my cheeks burning with humiliation. As soon as I reached my desk, I broke down in tears. It was too much. The constant criticism, the public humiliation, the stress of navigating this impossible situation with my mother-in-law. I couldn't take it anymore. That evening, I stumbled into our apartment, still sniffling. Jake took one look at me and pulled me into a tight hug. "That's it," he said firmly. "You can't keep doing this to yourself, Pam. You need to quit. Your mental health is more important than any job." The next day, I marched into Vivian's office and handed in my resignation. Her face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little thing," she sputtered. "After everything this agency has done for you? You're just going to abandon us?" I stood my ground, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm sorry, but I can't continue working in this environment. My last day will be in 2 weeks." As I turned to leave, Vivian's voice stopped me cold. "You think you can just walk away? I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. You'll regret this, Pamela. Mark my words." I threw myself into job hunting, confident that my skills and experience would land me a new position quickly. But as the weeks turned into months, I started to worry. Every promising lead seemed to fizzle out at the last minute. It was as if someone was sabotaging my efforts. Finally, after nearly 6 months of searching, I landed a job at a smaller agency. It wasn't as prestigious as my old position, but I was grateful for the opportunity. As I settled into my new role, I began to feel like things were finally looking up. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Just as I was starting to feel secure in my new job, my boss called me into his office. The moment I saw his face, I knew something was wrong. "Pamela," he said, his voice heavy with regret, "I'm afraid we have to let you go. Your work has been excellent. It's just, well, I can't say more, but my hands are tied. I'm sorry." As I packed up my desk in a daze, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Vivian. "How does unemployment feel, dear? Perhaps now you'll learn your place." In that moment, I realized the true extent of my mother-in-law's vindictiveness. She hadn't just threatened to ruin my career, she was actually doing it. The following months were a blur of anxiety and frustration. No matter how many resumes I sent out or interviews I went to, I couldn't seem to land a job. I started picking up freelance gigs just to make ends meet, but it was barely enough to cover our bills. One afternoon, as I sat at our kitchen table, scrolling through job listings I knew would lead nowhere, my phone rang. It was Vivian. My finger hovered over the decline button, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Pamela, dear," Vivian's saccharine voice oozed through the speaker. "I just thought I'd check in on my favorite daughter-in-law. You know, Jake's birthday is coming up soon." I froze. In all the chaos of the past few months, I'd completely forgotten about Jake's birthday. "I was thinking," Vivian continued, her voice suddenly warm, "why don't we surprise him? We could throw a party at my house. All his friends, family, it would be lovely, don't you think? It's time we put our differences aside, don't you think? Jake'd be so happy to see us getting along." As much as I wanted to refuse, I couldn't deny that Jake would love to see his mother and wife reconcile. And after everything he'd done for me, didn't he deserve a special birthday? "All right," I said hesitantly. "What did you have in mind?" Vivian's voice brightened. "Wonderful. Why don't you come over early on the day of the party? We can set everything up together. It'll be our little secret from Jake." Against my better judgment, I agreed. The day of the party arrived, and I made my way to Vivian's house, my stomach in knots. As I approached the front door, I could hear voices and laughter inside. As I stepped inside, I was shocked to see the house already full of guests. Vivian's phone was in her hand, apparently live streaming the event. "Everyone," Vivian announced loudly, her eyes gleaming with malice, "I'd like you all to greet our help for the evening." Before I could process what was happening, Vivian thrust a maid's uniform into my hands. "Here you go, dear. The kitchen's that way. Chop chop, these guests won't serve themselves." I stood there, stunned, as the room fell silent. All eyes were on me, a mix of pity and second-hand embarrassment on their faces. "What's the matter?" Vivian sneered, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet room. "This is what you're suited for, isn't it? A girl from the slums, parents who worked in a factory. You should be grateful I'm giving you the opportunity to serve your betters." The humiliation was overwhelming. Tears pricked at my eyes as I looked around the room, desperately searching for a friendly face, for someone to stand up to this cruelty. But everyone averted their gaze, unwilling to challenge Vivian. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I'd endured months of Vivian's torment, but this was a step too far. Without a word, I dropped the uniform at Vivian's feet and stormed out of the house, ignoring her calls behind me. I burst into our apartment, a mess of tears and anger. Jake was there, getting ready to head to his mother's house. He took one look at me, and his face fell. When I told him everything, Jake's face paled. He grabbed his phone and quickly pulled up his mother's social media page. There it was, the video of my humiliation, already gaining views and nasty comments. Jake's hands shook as he watched the video. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the love for his mother warring with his love for me. But as Vivian's cruel words rang out from the phone speakers, his jaw set in determination. He dialed Vivian's number, putting the phone on speaker. When she answered, her voice was sickly sweet. "Jake, darling, where are you? Everyone's waiting." "Save it, Mom," Jake cut her off. "I saw the video. How could you do that to Pamela?" There was a pause, then Vivian's voice turned cold. "Oh please, Jake. I was just putting her in her place. You know she's not good enough for you. I was doing you a favor." "No, Mom," Jake interrupted again. "You weren't doing me any favors. You were being cruel and manipulative. I love Pamela, and I won't let you treat her like this anymore. We're done. Don't contact us again." He hung up before Vivian could respond. The silence in our apartment was deafening. Jake turned to me, his eyes soft. "I'm so sorry, Pam. I had no idea she would go this far." I fell into his arms, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. We spent the rest of the evening together, ignoring the constant ringing of Jake's phone. It was only the next morning that we realized the full extent of Vivian's retaliation. Jake's boss called him in for an emergency meeting. When he returned home a few hours later, his face was ashen. "They fired me," he said, his voice hollow. "Apparently, the CEO is a close friend of my mother's. She asked him to let me go." We spent the next few days trying to figure out our next move. With both of us unemployed and Vivian's influence seemingly everywhere, our options felt limited. "Maybe," Jake said hesitantly one evening, "maybe we should consider moving. Start fresh somewhere else, away from my mother's influence." The idea was tempting, but something nagged at me. "Jake," I said slowly, "why did your parents get divorced? You've never really talked about it." Jake's face clouded over. "I don't really know the details. Mom always said Dad abandoned us, that he didn't want anything to do with me. Dad tried to contact me a few times when I was younger, but Mom always intercepted the calls, told me he was just trying to manipulate us." An idea started to form in my mind. "Jake, what if we reached out to your dad? Maybe he could shed some light on all of this." We arranged to meet Jake's father, Robert, at a quiet cafe the next day. As we walked in, I spotted an older man who bore a striking resemblance to Jake. His face lit up when he saw us, and he stood to greet us with a warm, if slightly awkward, hug for Jake. "You must be Pamela," he said, turning to me with a kind smile. "It's wonderful to meet you." As we settled in with our coffees, Robert's face grew serious. "Jake, I can't tell you how happy I am to hear from you. But I have a feeling this isn't just a social call. What's going on?" Jake took a deep breath and began to explain everything: Vivian's treatment of me, her sabotage of our careers, the humiliating party incident. Robert listened intently, his face growing darker with each revelation. "Dad," Jake said hesitantly, "what really happened between you and Mom? Why did you divorce?" Robert's eyes clouded over with a mix of anger and sadness. "It's a long story, son. One I'm not proud of. You see, I used to work for my father's company. Your mother was in the accounting department. I thought we were happy, but..." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee before continuing. "One day, the police showed up at the office. Your grandfather was arrested for tax evasion. It all happened so fast, the company was in chaos, and suddenly your mother was taking charge, saying she'd keep things running." Jake and I exchanged a glance, both thinking the same thing. This sounded awfully familiar. Robert continued. "I had my suspicions. Your mother had access to all the financial records, and she'd been pushing for more control in the company for months. I confronted her, asked her if she had anything to do with framing your grandfather. She didn't deny it," Robert continued. "Instead, she threatened me. I had an affair. It was brief, but your mother found out. She had evidence, photos, messages, everything. Jake and I exchanged a shocked glance as Robert continued, his voice heavy with regret. The woman I had the affair with, her husband was an incredibly influential man in our industry. Your mother threatened to tell him everything unless I did exactly as she said. She gave me an ultimatum: divorce her, give her everything, and stay away from you, or she'd destroy me completely. I'm ashamed to say I took the coward's way out. I thought I was protecting you, Jake. As we sat there, processing everything we'd learned, a memory suddenly hit me. Jake, I said urgently, remember when I first started at the agency? I noticed some discrepancies in the books. I even took some pictures, thinking I might need to bring it up to Vivian later. Jake's eyes widened. Pam, are you saying? I nodded. I think your mother might be doing the same thing she did to your grandfather. If we can prove it. After our revealing conversation with Robert at the cafe, we all decided to return to our apartment. As soon as we entered, I made a beeline for my laptop. Jake and Robert watched intently as I booted it up, their anticipation palpable. Here they are, I said, pulling up the folder containing the incriminating photos. Just as I remembered. Jake and Robert leaned in, their eyes widening as they took in the images on the screen. Clear as day, there was evidence of double-entry bookkeeping, one set of books for the tax authorities, and another showing the true state of the company's finances. Jake's face set in determination. We need to take this to the authorities right away. Mom can't keep getting away with this. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We contacted the tax authorities, presenting them with the evidence I had uncovered. They launched a full and in-depth audit of Vivian's agency. The investigation was thorough and relentless. The scale of tax evasion was staggering. Vivian was arrested and charged with multiple counts of tax evasion and fraud. The trial was swift, and the evidence overwhelming. In the end, the judge handed down a harsh sentence: Vivian would be spending several years in prison. In the aftermath of Vivian's conviction, the court decided to transfer ownership of the agency to Jake, as the closest family member not implicated in the crimes. It was a lot to take in, and we spent many late nights discussing what to do next. One evening, as we sat on our balcony watching the sunset, Jake turned to me with a smile. You know, Pam, I've been thinking. This agency needs a fresh start, a new direction. And I can't think of anyone better to lead it than you. I stared at him in shock. Me? But Jake, He cut me off gently. You're brilliant, Pam. You saw what was happening when no one else did. You have the skills, the vision, and the integrity to turn this agency into something we can be proud of. What do you say? Will you be our new executive director? Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. After everything we'd been through, after all the times Vivian had tried to tear me down, here I was, being offered the chance to lead the very agency she had used to torment me. The next few months were busy as we restructured the agency. We implemented strict ethical guidelines, rebuilt client relationships, and created a work environment based on respect and creativity. Slowly but surely, the agency's reputation began to recover. Through it all, Robert was there, offering support and advice. Over time, the awkwardness faded, and we found ourselves enjoying Sunday dinners together, rebuilding the family bonds that Vivian had tried so hard to destroy. The name's Rachel, and I'm the oldest of 2 daughters. From as far back as I can remember, I was the serious one, the independent one. My sister Lily? She was the complete opposite. Growing up, our house was always filled with noise. Lily's laughter, Mom and Dad's doting words, the constant buzz of the latest pop songs. Me? I preferred the quiet corners, nose buried in a book or scribbling away at my homework. Birthdays and holidays were a stark reminder of how different Lily and I were. While she'd tear through her gifts, squealing with delight at the latest trendy clothes or gadgets, I'd carefully set aside the money I received. "What are you saving for this time, Ratch?" Dad would ask, a hint of pride in his voice that never quite reached his eyes. "A laptop for studying," I'd reply. The library computers are always full. He'd nod, but I could see the disconnect. They never quite understood why I didn't want the things other girls my age did. Lily, on the other hand, was a whirlwind of ever-changing styles and demands. "Mom, did you see the new iPhone? Everyone at school has one. I need it." And just like that, she'd have it. No questions asked, no saving required. I remember the day I finally bought my laptop. I'd saved for months, researching the best model for my needs. When I brought it home, I was bursting with pride. "Look, I finally got it," I announced at dinner. Mom glanced up from her plate. "That's nice, dear. Oh, Lily, tell us about your day at the mall." And just like that, the conversation shifted. Lily launched into a detailed description of her latest shopping spree, and my achievement faded into the background. It wasn't that they didn't love me. I knew they did, in their own way. But Lily was the sun in our family's solar system, and I was a distant planet, quietly orbiting on my own path. As we grew older, the differences only became more pronounced. While Lily experimented with wild hairstyles and the latest fashion trends, I stuck to my practical ponytail and comfortable jeans. The library became my second home, a quiet sanctuary where I could focus on my goals without distraction. When it came time for college, I threw myself into applications with the same determination I'd shown throughout high school. I spent countless nights perfecting my essays, researching scholarships, and studying for entrance exams. The day I received my acceptance letter, along with a full scholarship, was one of the proudest moments of my life. I burst into the kitchen, waving the letter. "Mom, Dad, I got in. Full ride." Mom looked up from where she was helping Lily with her makeup. "Oh, that's nice, dear." "Lily, hold still, I'm trying to get this eyeliner perfect." Dad glanced over his newspaper. "Good job, Rachel." We expected nothing less. Their lukewarm response stung, but I was used to it. I retreated to my room, clutching the letter to my chest. This was my ticket out, my chance to prove myself. Meanwhile, Lily barely scraped through high school. The day she brought home her mediocre report card, I expected our parents to finally show some disappointment. Instead, they rallied around her. "Oh, sweetie, don't worry about it," Mom cooed, stroking Lily's hair. "College isn't for everyone. You're talented in so many other ways." Dad nodded in agreement. "That's right, princess. You'll find your path." I couldn't believe my ears. "Are you kidding me? She barely passed." Mom shot me a sharp look. "Rachel, don't be cruel. Your sister has other gifts." I bit my tongue and retreated once again. It was clear that no matter what I achieved, Lily would always be the favorite. College was a breath of fresh air. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who valued hard work and ambition. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make the most of this opportunity. One day, during my sophomore year, I got a call from home. It was Lily, her voice bubbly with excitement. "Rach, guess what? I'm thinking of taking some beauty courses. Mom and Dad think it's a great idea." I wanted to tell her about the fascinating research project I was working on, about the internship I'd landed for the summer. But I knew she wouldn't care. As I hung up, I couldn't help but feel a mix of frustration and determination. I was on my own path, and I was going to make it count. The years flew by. While Lily flitted from one beauty course to another, never quite finishing anything, I graduated with honors. I landed a job at a prestigious company before the ink was dry on my diploma. The day I moved into my own apartment was bittersweet. As I unpacked my meager belongings, I thought about how different my life was from Lily's. She was still living at home, being pampered by our parents. But I was standing on my own 2 feet, ready to take on the world. My first few months at work were a whirlwind. I worked longer hours than anyone else, determined to prove myself. My dedication didn't go unnoticed. Within a year, I was promoted to team leader. I called home to share the news. Mom answered, "Oh, Rachel, that's nice. but guess what? Lily's met the most wonderful boy. He comes from such a good family. We're all so excited. As she rattled on about Lily's new boyfriend, my promotion faded into the background. I hung up feeling deflated but more determined than ever. If my family couldn't appreciate my achievements, I'd just have to achieve even more. I threw myself into my work like a woman possessed. Days blurred into nights, weekends became just another opportunity to get ahead. My dedication paid off. I got another promotion, then another. Before I knew it, I was head of the department, the youngest in the company's history. Mr. Thompson, the owner, called me into his office one day. "Rachel, your work has been exceptional. We've never had someone rise through the ranks so quickly." I beamed with pride. "Thank you, sir. I love what I do." He smiled. "It shows. That's why I want to offer you something special. We have a program for our top employees, a chance to buy an apartment at a significant discount. You've more than earned it." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork and planning. When I finally got the keys, I felt like I was walking on air. I decided to throw a housewarming party, a chance to celebrate my success with the people who mattered most. I didn't have much furniture yet, so I bought some inexpensive plastic tables and chairs. I arranged everything carefully, making sure the disposable tableware matched the decor. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. The day of the party arrived. My colleagues showed up first, bearing gifts and warm congratulations. Then my family arrived. Mom, Dad, and Lily swept in like a whirlwind. I noticed Lily's eyes darting around, taking in the modest furnishings with a barely concealed smirk. As the evening wore on, I noticed a pattern. Every time one of my colleagues tried to congratulate me or mention my accomplishments, my parents would swiftly change the subject to Lily. "Oh, that reminds me," Mom would say, cutting off my coworker mid-sentence. "Did Rachel tell you about Lily's latest modeling gig? She's just so photogenic." Dad would chime in. "Yes, our Lily was born for the spotlight. Such natural talent." I saw the confused and slightly horrified looks on my colleagues' faces. I wanted to sink into the floor. Lily, for her part, basked in the attention. "Oh, Mom, stop it," she'd say with a giggle, clearly loving every moment. Finally, mercifully, my family left. As soon as the door closed behind them, my coworker Sarah turned to me, her eyes wide. "Rachel, what the hell was that?" she asked, her voice low and concerned. I shrugged, trying to play it off. "Oh, that's just how they are." Another colleague, Mark, shook his head. "No, Rachel, that's not normal. Are you okay? Do you need help?" I felt a lump forming in my throat. Their concern was touching, but also embarrassing. "Guys, really, it's fine. I'm used to it. Who wants another drink?" As I busied myself in the kitchen, I could hear them whispering, their concern palpable. I blinked back tears, determined not to let them see how much my family's behavior had affected me. After the housewarming fiasco, I threw myself back into work with renewed vigor. Months flew by, and slowly but surely, I transformed my apartment into a space that truly felt like home. Every piece of furniture, every splash of color on the walls was a testament to my hard work and independence. One sunny Saturday, I decided to treat myself to something I'd been eyeing for a while, a car. Nothing flashy, just a reliable sedan that would get me from point A to point B. As I drove it home, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was mine, bought with my own money, a symbol of my success. I hadn't planned on telling my family, but news travels fast. The phone rang that evening, and Lily's voice chirped through the speaker. "Rach, I heard you bought a car. That's nice," she said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. You're really doing this the hard way. All this working and saving, it's so unnecessary." I felt my hackles rise. "What do you mean?" "Well, the main task of a woman is to get married properly, silly. Find a man who'll support you and give you everything you need. Why work yourself to the bone when you could have it all handed to you? I was speechless for a moment. Was she serious? Lily, that's not. I mean, I want to earn things for myself. I'm proud of what I've accomplished. She laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. Oh, Ratch, always the difficult one. Well, you'll see. I'll show you how it's done. Before I could respond, she had hung up. I stared at the phone, a mix of anger and disbelief swirling in my gut. How could we see the world so differently? A few months later, I got my answer. Lily called, her voice bubbling with excitement. Rachel, you'll never guess what happened. I'm getting married. His name is Robert. He's absolutely loaded, Ratch. His parents are paying for the whole wedding. It's going to be gorgeous. As she rattled off details about dresses and flowers and guest lists, I felt a strange hollowness in my chest. This was what she had been working towards, I realized. This was her version of success. The day of the wedding arrived all too soon. I stood in the grand hall, feeling out of place among the glittering guests. Lily was radiant in her designer gown, and our parents couldn't stop gushing. I sipped my champagne, trying to quell the bitterness rising in my throat. Had they ever looked at me with such pride? Had they ever been this happy for my accomplishments? As the evening wore on, I felt more and more like an outsider. Lily was in her element, charming guests and basking in the attention. Our parents flitted about, proudly introducing themselves as the parents of the bride. As I drove home in my modest car, to my modest apartment that I'd worked so hard for, I couldn't help but wonder, had I made the right choices? Was Lily right? Had I chosen the harder path? But then I thought about my job, my achievements, the sense of pride I felt every time I accomplished something on my own. No, I decided. My path might be harder, but it was mine. And that made all the difference. After Lily's wedding, life settled into a new rhythm. Work kept me busy, but my mother's frequent calls became an unwelcome interruption. Every conversation was the same. Rachel, darling, Mom would start, her voice dripping with false sweetness. You'll never believe what Lily's been up to. I'd brace myself as she launched into another tale of Lily's fabulous new life. She's been invited to the most exclusive gatherings. Can you believe it? Our Lily, rubbing elbows with high society. One day, after a particularly trying call, I couldn't hold back anymore. Mom, that's great for Lily, but don't you want to know what's going on in my life? There was a pause. Oh, honey, she said, her tone patronizing. Of course we care. But you really should learn from your sister. Be more beautiful, get things easily. Why work all day for pennies when you could have it all? A few weeks later, an invitation arrived. Lily and Robert were having a housewarming party for their new luxury apartment, a gift from his parents, of course. The night of the party, I stood outside their building, feeling small. I smoothed down my simple dress and took a deep breath before heading in. The apartment was stunning. Every surface gleamed, every piece of furniture looked like it cost more than my yearly salary. My parents were already there, cooing over every detail. I tried to blend into the background, but Lily spotted me. She sauntered over, champagne flute in hand. Rachel, so glad you could make it, she said, her eyes scanning my outfit critically. I hope you're taking notes. This is how a housewarming should be done. None of that plastic furniture and disposable dish nonsense like at your place. I felt my cheeks burn. Lily, that's... But she was already moving on, leaving me with the sting of her words. The weeks that followed were a parade of Lily's extravagance. She seemed to buy everything in sight, always the most expensive option. Then came the car. I was leaving work one evening when a sleek sports car pulled up beside me. The window rolled down, revealing Lily's smug face. Like it? She preened. Just a little gift from Robert. Thought I'd take it for a spin. I glanced at my reliable but unremarkable sedan. It's very nice, Lily. She followed my gaze and laughed. Oh, Rachel. Always settling for less. You'll always be working for others, while I live the good life. Tada. 2 years flew by in a blur of spreadsheets, meetings, and promotions. While I climbed the corporate ladder, Lily seemed content to climb from one shopping spree to the next. Our paths couldn't have been more different, but I'd made my peace with it. Or so I thought. It was a regular Tuesday when my world tilted on its axis. Mom called, her voice uncharacteristically shaky. Rachel, it's Lily. She's back home. Robert left her. He said she was too shallow, too focused on spending his money. Called her stupid, can you believe it? He had her sign a prenup, so she's got nothing. I felt a mix of emotions, shock, concern, and if I'm being honest, a tiny flicker of vindication. I squashed it down immediately, ashamed of myself. I'm coming over, I said, already grabbing my keys. When I arrived at my parents' house, it was like walking into a war zone. I could hear Lily's screams from the driveway. Inside, it was worse. Lily was in the living room, mascara streaking down her face, her designer clothes torn. She was throwing anything she could get her hands on, vases, picture frames, cushions. He can't do this to me, she shrieked. I'm Lily, I'm beautiful, I'm perfect. Mom and Dad fluttered around her, trying to calm her down. Sweetie, please, Mom pleaded. We'll figure this out. Daddy will buy you a new dress, won't you, dear? Dad nodded frantically. Of course, princess, anything you want. I stood there, watching this scene unfold, feeling like I was in some bizarre alternate reality. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't how life was supposed to work, was it? As the days passed, Lily's tantrums didn't subside. She'd cry for hours, then scream, then demand expensive gifts to make herself feel better. Our parents, ever eager to please their favorite, complied with every request. One evening, after a particularly bad episode, I couldn't hold my tongue anymore. Maybe, I said cautiously, Lily should consider getting a job? It might help her appreciate the value of money and give her something to focus on besides all this. The room went dead silent. Then all hell broke loose. Lily's face contorted in rage. A job like you? Slaving away day after day like some peasant? She burst into tears and ran upstairs, slamming her door so hard the house shook. Before I could process what had happened, Mom and Dad rounded on me. How dare you? Mom hissed. Your sister is going through a terrible time, and you suggest she lower herself to your level? But I didn't mean, I tried to explain, but they weren't listening. Get out, Dad said, his voice cold. Get out of this house right now. Mom pointed to the door. Out. And don't come back until you can be supportive of your sister. In a daze, I grabbed my purse and left. As I walked into my apartment, my sanctuary, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness at being rejected by my family, anger at their blindness to Lily's faults, and oddly, a sense of relief. For the first time, I saw clearly how toxic my family dynamic had been all these years. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Just days after the blowout with my family, I received news that left me speechless. I'd won a company contest. The prize? A 4-month around-the-world cruise. In a moment of weakness, or perhaps hope, I called my parents. Maybe this good news would bridge the gap between us. Mom, Dad, you won't believe it. I want to cruise around the world. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then, my mother's cold voice cut through. Rachel, how can you be so selfish? Your sister is going through a terrible time, and you're bragging about vacations? I felt like I'd been slapped. I'm not bragging, I just thought. Mom interrupted. If you had any decency, you'd give that ticket to Lily. She needs a change of scenery. You can stay home and work, like you always do. Something snapped inside me. Years of pent-up frustration came pouring out. No, I said firmly. I won this trip. I earned it. I'm not giving it up because Lily made poor life choices. I'm going. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. I packed my bags, put my affairs in order, and on the day of departure, I turned off my phone. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. The cruise was everything I'd dreamed of and more. I watched sunsets in the Mediterranean, explored ancient ruins in Greece, marveled at the bustling streets of Hong Kong. For 4 glorious months, I was just Rachel, not the responsible older sister, not the family disappointment. Just me. But all good things must come to an end. As the ship docked back home, reality came crashing back. I turned on my phone, bracing myself for the barrage of messages. Surprisingly, there were only a few missed calls from my parents. Feeling lighter than I had in years, I headed home. But as I approached my apartment door, I heard noises inside. My heart raced. Had someone broken in? I cautiously opened the door, only to find myself face to face with Lily. She was sprawled on my couch, surrounded by shopping bags and empty takeout containers. "Lily?" I gasped. "What are you doing here?" She looked up, barely fazed by my sudden appearance. "Oh, you're back. Finally." I stood there, key still in hand, trying to process the scene before me. "How did you get in here?" Lily rolled her eyes. "Don't be dense, Rachel. I used the spare keys you gave Mom and Dad. I needed a change of scenery. Everything at home reminded me of, you know." I stood there, staring at Lily, trying to process everything. This was too much. I needed air. "I'm going to the store," I muttered, grabbing my car keys and heading for the door. But when I reached the parking lot, my car was nowhere to be seen. Panic rising, I called my parents. Mom answered, her voice sickly sweet. "Rachel, dear, how was your trip?" "Where's my car?" I demanded, cutting to the chase. There was a pause. Then Dad's voice came on the line. "We sold it." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "You, what?" Lily needed cheering up, Mom explained, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "We used the money to take her shopping, to the spa." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "That was my car. You had no right." "Now, Rachel," Dad's stern voice cut in. "We're family. What's yours is ours. Don't be so selfish." Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration, resentment, and anger came pouring out. "Selfish? You steal my car, invade my home, and I'm selfish? I want my money back, now." Their response was immediate and harsh. They called me heartless, ungrateful, a disappointment. The words stung, but for the first time, they didn't break me. I hung up and marched back to my apartment. Lily was still there, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. "Get out," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Lily looked up, shocked. "What?" "Get out now." She tried to argue, to manipulate me like she always had, but I stood firm. For once in my life, I put myself first. The next day, I hired a lawyer and sued my parents for the value of the car. They were furious, threatening to disown me, to cut me out of their will. But I stood my ground. The case went to court. It was a grueling process, laying out years of emotional manipulation and financial abuse for strangers to judge. But in the end, justice prevailed. The judge ruled in my favor. My parents were forced to sell their house to repay me. They moved into a small apartment, all the while painting me as the villain who had ruined their lives. But for once, their words couldn't touch me. As I drove my new car home from the dealership, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. Free from expectations, free from manipulation, free to be myself. I cut off all contact with my family. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. The first few months were hard. There were moments of doubt, of loneliness. But slowly, I began to build a life on my own terms. I threw myself into my work, rising quickly through the ranks. I made new friends who appreciated me for who I was, not what I could do for them. I traveled, I learned new skills, I found hobbies that brought me joy. And most importantly, I learned to love myself. to appreciate my strength, my determination, my worth. Now, as I sit in my office, looking out over the city, I can't help but smile. The path I chose wasn't easy, but it was mine. I built this life brick by brick, decision by decision. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Isabella Martinez, that's my name. I never knew my dad, but honestly, I didn't feel like I was missing out on much. Mom worked her ass off to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. From as early as I can remember, I was helping around the house. Dishes, laundry, you name it. Mom always said, "Bella, you gotta learn to take care of yourself. The world ain't gonna do it for you." Those words stuck with me. Our apartment was small, but it was home. The sound of Mom's ancient sewing machine was the soundtrack to my childhood. She'd stay up late, mending clothes for extra cash. I'd often fall asleep to its rhythmic hum. What did I like? Computers. It started when our school got a bunch of donated PCs. Most kids used them for games, but I was fascinated by what made them tick. I'd stay after school, tinkering, learning. One day, Mr. Johnson, the IT teacher, caught me trying to install some video editing software. "What are you up to, Isabella?" he asked, eyebrow raised. I froze, thinking I was in trouble. I just wanted to learn how to edit videos. Instead of getting mad, he smiled. "Well, why didn't you say so? Let me show you a few tricks." From then on, every Tuesday and Thursday after school, Mr. Johnson would teach me the ins and outs of video editing. At home, I'd practice on our old, wheezing computer. As high school graduation approached, reality hit hard. College wasn't in the cards for me. The day after graduation, I marched into WKLP, our local TV station. The receptionist looked at me like I was crazy when I asked about job openings, but pointed me towards the HR office. 3 interviews and 1 practical test later, I had my first real job. Assistant video editor. The pay wasn't great, but it was a start. For the next 2 years, I worked my ass off. Weekdays at the station, weekends doing freelance gigs. Every penny I could spare went into my college fund. It was exhausting, but I was determined. Then, on a rare night out with Lisa and Carlos, everything changed. We were at this house party, some friend of a friend thing. That's where I met him, Ryan Thompson. He wasn't what you'd call classically handsome. Kinda nerdy, with thick-rimmed glasses and a slightly crooked smile. But when he started talking about his work in software development, his whole face lit up. I was intrigued. As the party wound down, Ryan asked for my number. I hesitated for a second, then thought, what the hell, and gave it to him. The next few months were like a whirlwind. Ryan and I started dating, and it was nice. Different from what I expected, but in a good way. One night, as we were walking home from a movie, Ryan proposed to me, and I agreed. The wedding was small but beautiful. My mom cried happy tears, and Ryan's parents, Linda and Robert, well, they surprised me. I'd been nervous about meeting them, given the whole wealthy family thing. But they were warm and welcoming from the start. The first 2 years of our marriage were good. Not perfect, but good. We had our own place, a cozy apartment not far from the TV station where I still worked. Ryan had his job at some big tech firm, and things were comfortable. We traveled a bit, mostly weekend trips around the country. It was more than I'd ever done growing up, and I loved every minute of it. Seeing new places, trying new foods, it was like a whole new world had opened up to me. But then, things started to change. It started with the little things. Ryan would sigh when I talked about work, or roll his eyes when I got excited about a new editing technique I'd learned. Then more. The first time he made an excuse not to take me to a work party, I didn't think much of it. "It's just a boring office thing," he said. "You wouldn't enjoy it." But then it happened again and again. One night, I overheard him on the phone with a coworker. "Yeah, just me tonight. You know how it is. Bella's not really into these kinds of events." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Not into these events? He'd never even given me a chance. That night, I confronted him. Ryan, why don't you want me to come to your work events anymore? So you're ashamed of me? No, it's not that. It's just, sometimes it's hard for you to keep up with the conversations, you know? I don't want you to feel out of place. His words stung, but a part of me wondered if he was right. Maybe I did need to step up my game. So, I made a decision. I was going to go back to school. I enrolled in night classes at the local community college, studying information technology. It was tough, balancing work and school and my marriage, but I was determined to make it work. But even as I worked my ass off to improve myself, things with Ryan kept getting worse. The cold shoulder turned into open contempt. The man I married seemed to be disappearing before my eyes, replaced by someone I barely recognized. And then came the night that changed everything. I'd just gotten home from a late class, exhausted but feeling good about acing a test. Ryan was in the living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "Class, remember? I told you I had a big test tonight." He scoffed. "You're a fool and a hillbilly, Bella. And no amount of schooling is going to change that." I felt like I'd been slapped. But before I could respond, I heard a gasp from the doorway. Linda and Robert was standing there, a look of horror on their faces. Linda leaned forward, her eyes flashing. "How dare you talk to your wife like that? Ryan, we raised you better than this." "You don't understand," Ryan said, his voice rising. "Do you know how embarrassing it is to have a wife who can't even keep up with basic conversations at work events?" I flinched, but Robert's next words shocked us all into silence. "Embarrassing?" he thundered. "Let me tell you about embarrassing, boy. Your grandfather, my father, didn't have a lick of formal education. He was born in the poorest part of town, worked his fingers to the bone to give me a better life. So don't you dare sit there and act like you're some kind of aristocrat." I felt a rush of warmth towards my in-laws, but Ryan's next words froze it in its tracks. "I'll behave how I see fit," he spat. "This is my life, my marriage." After his parents left, Ryan started going away more often. "Weekend trips with friends," he'd say, not even bothering to invite me anymore. I threw myself into work and school, taking on extra weekend gigs to fill the lonely hours. Then, my mom got sick. Cancer, the doctors said. It was aggressive, and within months, she was gone. I felt lost, adrift without my anchor. Ryan was barely there, offering awkward pats on the back instead of the comfort I craved. In my grief, I found myself turning to Linda more and more. She'd call to check on me, invite me over for tea, just sit and talk with me for hours. It was the motherly comfort I desperately needed. But this only seemed to infuriate Ryan more. One night, after I'd spent the afternoon at his parents' house, he exploded. "Why are you always over there?" he yelled. "Are you trying to turn my parents against me?" I was stunned. "What? No, Ryan. I needed someone to talk to." I went to bed that night with tears in my eyes, wondering how things had gone so wrong. A few weeks later, I started feeling off. Exhausted all the time, nauseous in the mornings. At first, I chalked it up to stress and grief. But as the symptoms persisted, a different possibility started to form in my mind. I bought a pregnancy test on my way home from work one day, my heart pounding as I waited for the results. When those two lines appeared, I felt a mix of joy and terror. A baby. We were having a baby. That night, I waited nervously for Ryan to come home. When he finally walked through the door, I took a deep breath. "Ryan, we need to talk. I'm pregnant." The look on his face wasn't joy, or even surprise. It was pure fury. "Pregnant?" he spat. "Are you kidding me? We can't have a baby now. Get an abortion, Bella. That's final." I fled the apartment, tears streaming down my face. Without thinking, I found myself at Linda and Robert's doorstep. When Linda opened the door and saw my face, she immediately pulled me into a hug. Through my sobs, I told them everything. About the pregnancy, about Ryan's reaction. I've never seen Robert look so angry, or Linda so determined. You listen to me, Isabella, Linda said, holding my face in her hands. This is your decision. If you want this baby, we'll support you every step of the way. Ryan be damned. The next few months were a blur of doctor's appointments, work, and growing tension at home. Ryan barely spoke to me, spending most of his time out with friends. I focused on my job, squirreling away every extra penny I could for the baby. One afternoon, I had a doctor's appointment to get some routine tests done. I'd taken half a day off work and was looking forward to a quiet evening at home afterward. As I pulled into our apartment complex, I noticed Ryan's car in the parking lot. Strange, he was usually at work at this hour. I climbed the stairs to our apartment, fumbling with my keys. As I opened the door, I heard Ryan's voice. I'll be there in a minute, babe. Just grabbing my overnight bag. My heart started racing. I stepped inside, and there was Ryan, packing a suitcase. Who were you talking to? Where are you going? Before he could answer, I heard a car horn honk outside. Ryan cursed under his breath and grabbed his bag. I don't have time for this. We'll talk when I get back. I followed him down to the parking lot, demanding answers. And that's when I saw her. Sitting in the passenger seat of Ryan's car was a woman. She was beautiful, with long blonde hair and perfect makeup. And she was very, very pregnant. As I stood there, frozen in shock, she got out of the car. She walked towards me with a smug smile on her face. So, you must be Isabella, she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I'm Melissa, Ryan's girlfriend. I turned to Ryan, who couldn't even meet my eyes. Is this true? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, still not looking at me. I felt a surge of anger and disgust. Aren't you ashamed? I asked Melissa, my voice shaking. He's married. We're having a baby too. Melissa's smile turned cold. Ashamed? No, honey, I had to fight for my happiness, and you've already lost this battle. It's not my fault you couldn't keep your man satisfied. I turned to Ryan, fury replacing my shock. How could you do this? To me, to our baby? He finally looked at me, his face a mask of indifference. Come on, Bella, we both know this marriage was a mistake. I never loved you. You were convenient. A good housekeeper, someone to keep the bed warm. But Melissa, she's my soulmate. She's smart, educated. She fits into my world. Each word was like a knife in my heart. I stood there, tears streaming down my face, as Ryan got into the car with Melissa. I'll be back on Monday to get the rest of my things, he said. We can talk about the divorce then. As they drove away, I sank to my knees in the parking lot, my world crumbling around me. I picked up my phone with shaking hands and dialed Linda's number. When they arrived at my apartment that night, Linda took one look at my tear-stained face and pulled me into a fierce hug. I listened, numb, as Robert berated Ryan over the speakerphone. His words were sharp, cutting. How dare you treat your wife this way, he thundered. The woman carrying your child. Ryan's voice came through, defensive and cold. Dad, you don't understand. Melissa is. Don't you dare mention that woman's name. Linda cut in. We will never accept her, do you hear me? Never. There was a pause, then Ryan's voice, eerily calm. Fine, I don't need your acceptance. I don't need you at all, I have Melissa now, and that's all I need. The next few months were a whirlwind. With Linda and Robert's help, I found a small apartment closer to them. The divorce proceedings were ugly, with Ryan fighting me every step of the way. But in the end, it was done. I was free of him, at least legally. When my daughter, Sophia, was born on a crisp autumn morning, it was Linda who held my hand through the labor. Robert paced the waiting room, every bit the nervous grandfather. Ryan refused to even see Sophia. When I took him to court for child support, he had the audacity to demand a paternity test. I agreed, knowing the truth. The results came back, confirming what I already knew: Sophia was his. The court ordered him to pay alimony, but I knew better than to count on his support. The years that followed were challenging, but also filled with unexpected joy. I threw myself into my studies, finally earning my degree in information technology. At work, my dedication paid off with a promotion to senior editor. But the real blessings were Linda and Robert. They embraced their role as grandparents with a fervor that sometimes brought tears to my eyes. Weekends were filled with trips to the park, family dinners, and impromptu movie nights. They were the family I'd always dreamed of, and Sophia adored them. 5 years flew by in a blur of bedtime stories, scraped knees, and proud moments. Sophia was growing into a smart, kind little girl, with her grandmother's smile and her grandfather's curiosity. Then, one ordinary Tuesday, everything changed again. Robert collapsed at home. The diagnosis was grim: advanced pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him months, maybe weeks. I threw myself into helping Linda care for him. Work, Sophia, my own needs, everything took a back seat. Robert had been more of a father to me than my own had ever been, and I was determined to be there for him until the end. Despite our best efforts, despite the treatments and the prayers, Robert slipped away from us 3 months later. I held Linda as she wept, feeling as though I'd lost my own father. At the funeral, I stood between Linda and Sophia, our hands linked. Ryan didn't show up. I hadn't really expected him to, but his absence was a stark reminder of how far he'd fallen. As the weeks passed, Linda's health began to decline rapidly. The loss of Robert seemed to have drained her will to live. She became frail, often confused, and prone to long bouts of silence. The solution came to me that night as I lay awake, worrying. The next morning, I called my boss and arranged to work remotely. Then I packed up Sophia and our essentials and moved into Linda's house. Our new routine took some adjusting. I hired a nurse to care for Linda during the mornings while I worked on my video editing projects. In the afternoons, Sophia and I would take over. We'd read to Linda, help her with her physical therapy exercises, or simply sit and reminisce about happier times. Weeks turned into months. Linda had good days and bad days. On the good days, we'd sit in the garden, enjoying the sunshine and each other's company. On the bad days, I'd hold her hand as she cried for Robert, for the son she'd lost long before his father's death. One sunny afternoon, Sophia and I returned from a walk to find a man in a crisp business suit leaving the house. My heart raced, fearing the worst. "Linda?" I called out as we entered. "Is everything okay?" She was sitting in her favorite armchair, looking tired but composed. "Everything's fine, dear. That was just Mr. Harrison, my lawyer. I needed to discuss some legal matters with him." I nodded, not pressing for details. If Linda wanted to share, she would. "All right, how about some tea?" 3 weeks later, Linda passed away in her sleep. With shaking hands, I dialed Ryan's number. When he answered, I struggled to keep my voice steady. "Ryan, it's Isabella. Your mother passed away this morning." There was a long pause, then Ryan's voice, cold and detached. "Well, I can't say I'm surprised or particularly upset. That woman made her choices. Look, I'm not coming to the funeral. Just let me know when the will reading is scheduled." On the day of the funeral, the church was packed. Linda had touched so many lives, and it showed. As I stood at the pulpit to deliver the eulogy, with Sophia holding my hand, I looked out at the sea of faces. Friends, neighbors, colleagues, all there to say goodbye to a woman who had loved so fiercely and been loved in return. Ryan's absence was a palpable void, a reminder of the tragedy that had torn this family apart. But as I began to speak, sharing memories of Linda's kindness, her strength, her unwavering love, I realized something profound. Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes, it's about choice. And Linda had chosen to love me, to love Sophia, even when her own son had turned his back on us all. As we laid Linda to rest beside Robert, I made a silent promise. I would honor her memory by living with the same love and grace she had shown me. And I would make sure Sophia grew up knowing the incredible grandparents she had been blessed with, even if their time together had been all too brief. A few days after we laid Linda to rest, I received a call from Mr. Harrison, Linda's lawyer. "Mrs. Thompson, it's time to read the will. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 10 a.m.? I've already contacted Mr. Thompson. He'll be there." The next morning, I arrived at the law office, my stomach in knots. I took a deep breath and walked in. Ryan was there with Melissa, both dressed expensively and wearing matching scowls. Melissa's eyes raked over me, her lip curling in disdain. "Let's begin," Mr. Harrison said, opening a folder. As he read, I watched Ryan's face. At first, he looked bored, then confused, and finally, as realization dawned, furious. "This can't be right," he interrupted. "Read it again." Mr. Harrison sighed. "Mr. Thompson, it's quite clear. Your mother has left all her property, including the house, to Isabella Thompson and her daughter, Sophia." Ryan rounded on me. "You," he snarled. "You manipulated my mother, you gold-digging scum. Well, enjoy it while you can. I'm kicking you out of that house today." As they stormed out, Melissa paused at the door. "You might have won this round," she hissed, "but trust me, we're not done." I sat there, shell-shocked, as Mr. Harrison explained the details of the will. It wasn't just the house. Linda had left everything to Sophia and me, her savings, her investments, everything. "She wanted to ensure you and Sophia would be taken care of," Mr. Harrison said gently. "Linda loved you both very much." Tears welled up in my eyes. Even after she was gone, Linda was still looking out for us. But Ryan was true to his word. The harassment started that very night, incessant phone calls, threats, promises to destroy me. I changed my number, but it didn't stop. Then came the intimidation. Men would approach us on the street, making vague threats about paying what we owed. Sophia was terrified, clinging to me whenever we left the house. One day, as a man was making his usual threats, I discreetly hit record on my phone. As soon as he left, I went straight to the police station. The investigation moved quickly. With my recording and testimony, along with statements from neighbors who had witnessed the harassment, the police built a solid case against Ryan. When confronted with the evidence, Ryan's hired thugs quickly turned on him, confirming he had paid them to scare us. I'll never forget the look on Ryan's face when the officer slapped the handcuffs on him. In the end, I was granted a restraining order against Ryan. He wasn't allowed within 500 feet of Sophia or me, or to contact us in any way. That night, as I tucked Sophia into bed, I looked around the room that had once been Linda's sewing room. Now it was filled with stuffed animals and children's books, a testament to the new life we were building. "Grandma and Grandpa are watching over us," Sophia mumbled sleepily, clutching the teddy bear Robert had given her on her 3rd birthday. "Yes, they are," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "And they'd be so proud of you, my brave girl." Life had finally settled into a peaceful rhythm. Sophia was thriving in school, and I had recently been promoted to deputy director at the TV station. Linda and Robert's legacy had given us security, but I was determined to build our own success. One sunny afternoon, as I left work, a familiar figure stepped out from behind a parked car. Melissa, Ryan's wife, looked nothing like the polished woman I remembered. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed. "Isabella, please," she said, her voice breaking. "I need your help." I tensed, ready for another confrontation, but her next words caught me off guard. "Our son is sick. He needs surgery. Please, we need money. Just half of the inheritance." "You don't need it all, do you?" Something felt off. "What's wrong with him?" I asked cautiously. Melissa's eyes darted around. It's his heart. No, his kidneys. The doctors say." As she fumbled through her explanation, I remembered our first encounter, her smug smile as she declared victory in our battle. A cold clarity washed over me. "You know, Melissa," I said calmly, "someone once told me that I had to fight for my happiness. And it looks like you've already lost this battle." Her face transformed, the mask of desperation replaced by fury. "You scum," she spat. "You owe us that money. It should have been ours." I stood my ground. "I don't owe you anything. Now leave, or I'm calling the police." As I walked away, her curses fading behind me, I felt a sense of closure. The last tie to my old life had been severed. That night, I made a decision. It was time for a fresh start. I sold Linda's house and bought a new one in a different neighborhood. Somewhere Ryan and Melissa wouldn't find us. Now, as I sit in our new living room, watching Sophia do her homework, I'm filled with gratitude. Gratitude for Linda and Robert, who loved us unconditionally. Gratitude for the strength I found within myself. And yes, even gratitude for the hardships that led me here,